Chapter 2736. The Heaven Destroyer planet was stopped by the godly king's palm. Then, the godly king's palm pushed it back, gradually leaving the gravitational circle. This process caused a great impact on the Heaven Destroyer planet. Due to the inertia, the three seas of the Heaven Destroyer planet stirred up destructive waves and tsunamis. At least tens of millions of miles of land were submerged by the waves and tsunamis. Under the crumbling earth, endless lava was being squeezed out and splashed out, filling the sky. As a result, the surviving 20 billion Heaven Destroyers on the three continents were quickly reduced by a third. However, Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu could accept this loss. After all, the Heaven Destroyer planet was saved, and more than 10 billion people were still alive. This was already a blessing in disguise. Half an hour later, the Heaven Destroyer planet was pushed out of the gravitational circle by the godly king's palm and flew back 30 million miles. It was only now that the resplendent golden God King's palm dissipated. The Heaven Destroyer planet was safe for the time being. However, the disaster on the planet was not over yet, and the towering waves had yet to dissipate. The 10 billion survivors were still in extreme chaos and panic. They were running for their lives. Phew, we finally saved it. On the Black Dragon warship, Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu both heaved a sigh of relief. The heavy burden in their hearts had finally been lifted. Tian Shu's eyes lit up as he looked expectantly at the passage between the two worlds. He waved his fists and said, "The Heaven Destroyer planet has been saved. Will the godly king appear next?" Yin Shuiyin was taken aback. She frowned and said, "The Heaven Destroyer planet has been saved. Ji Tianxing and his accomplices are nowhere to be seen. The godly king may not appear." Tian Shu refused to believe it. He braced himself and retorted, "Mother, although we don't know where Ji Tianxing is hiding, the godly king is omnipotent. He must know where Ji Tianxing is hiding and will find him and kill him." Yin Shuiyin only nodded slightly and did not say anything. After all, she and Tian Shu could not guess the godly king's thoughts. There was no point in discussing it. In less than 10 breaths of time, the huge passage between the two worlds lit up with a sacred golden light again. Swoosh! Following the emergence of the golden light, a golden figure flew out from the passageway and hovered in the air. It was an unimaginably majestic phantom of a god, which was tens of thousands of miles tall. His appearance was similar to that of a human, with extremely muscular limbs and a muscular body. The size of its head was still relatively balanced, and it was very similar to a human's. However, he had 3 eyes and a huge red eyeball on his forehead. Other than that, he also had 6 large golden wings on his back, the lines of which were smooth and gorgeous. This was the appearance of a true deity. However, he was only an illusory figure condensed from golden light. It was the avatar projection that Yin Shuiyin had mentioned. Tian Shu's eyes widened when he saw the god spirit's shadow appear. He was overjoyed. "Haha, I knew that his majesty would appear." Yin Shuiyin revealed a gratified smile as she nodded repeatedly. "It looks like his majesty places great importance on this matter." Indeed, he sent a projection of his avatar. Tian Shu's mind was filled with fantasies as he said with great anticipation, "His Majesty must have discovered Ji Tianxing and wants to kill this culprit. When His Majesty has dealt with Ji Tianxing, I will kneel to him and thank him in person. I will call him Master. When that time comes, Master will be so happy that he might even reward me with a supreme divine ability." Thinking of this, Tian Shu's blood surged, and all the anger and resentment in his heart were swept away. Yin Shuiyin only quietly looked at the god spirit's shadow and did not break Tian Shu's fantasy. When the God King's palm pushed the Heaven Destroyer star out of the gravitational sphere, Ji Tianxing knew that the black hole plan had failed. He secretly shook his head and prepared to leave. Although he was a little disappointed, the Heaven Destroyer star had suffered heavy casualties and greatly damaged its vitality. In the short term, the Heaven Destroyer star could not even take care of itself and would most likely not invade other star regions. He planned to leave quietly and wait for the storm to subside before dealing with the Heaven Destroyer star. The plan failed because of the intervention of the God King from the Upper Realm. I don't believe that the God King from the Upper Realm will keep an eye on the Heaven Destroyer star. If the Heaven Destroyer star lives for a few more years, I will have other methods to destroy them. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing stepped into the void, turned around, and flew into the distance. However, at this moment, golden light surged out of the huge passage between the two worlds, and a 10,000-mile-tall God Spirit's shadow appeared. Ji Tianxing immediately stopped flying and turned his head to look at the God Spirit's shadow. He wanted to see which God King was backing the Heaven Destroyer star. 1,000 years ago, he had dominated the God Realm's 100 regions and was famous throughout the world. He knew or had heard of at least half of the God Kings. Therefore, he was confident that he could recognize which God King was backing the Heaven Destroyer star. However, when he saw the God Spirit's shadow clearly, he frowned. Its appearance is 80% similar to a human's, with divine eyes on its forehead and 6 wings on its back. This guy, among those great divine kings, none of them have this kind of appearance. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, he smiled bitterly. This doppelganger projection is too common. Any God Lord or God King could have a doppelganger projection like this. In the God Realm, once one reached the God Lord realm, one could create a doppelganger projection and travel freely in the God Realm. Some God Lords and God Kings did not like to cultivate doppelganger superpowers, so they would not waste time on doppelganger techniques. The doppelganger projections that these experts created were mostly ordinary and very common. Naturally, the doppelganger projections did not have any special abilities or techniques. Only a small number of God Lords and God Kings were passionate about researching doppelganger techniques and would spend their time and energy. When these experts used doppelganger techniques, not only could they create tens of thousands of doppelgangers, but the doppelgangers' appearances were also very strange. Their doppelgangers even had all kinds of special abilities and effects. Ji Tianxing had researched doppelganger techniques in the past. He could create 9 doppelgangers instantly and use sword principle superpowers at the same time. The 9 doppelgangers were of different sizes. Some had 3 heads and 6 arms. Some were 10,000 miles tall, and some were like dragons or phoenixes. They all had different abilities. So, when Ji Tianxing saw the doppelganger projection in the void, he was unable to determine which God King's doppelganger it belonged to. Unless he had the ability of a God Lord or above, he would be able to see through the doppelganger projection. He still had to familiarize himself with the aura of many God Kings' godheads before he could determine the doppelganger's owner based on the aura of the doppelganger. However, it was a pity that he had not even reached the Heaven God Realm. Naturally, he would not be able to recognize which God King was the doppelganger projection's owner. Forget it. It won't be too late to investigate this matter after I ascend to the God Realm. Ji Tianxing shook his head and put away all the distracting thoughts in his head. He turned around and flew deep into the void. However, at this moment, the doppelganger projection that was 10,000 miles tall and had 6 wings on its back suddenly flapped its wings and flew towards Ji Tianxing as fast as the aurora. Chapter 2737. The Avatar came from the celestial world. After descending into the void, he had been searching for something. His eyes were bright, especially the 3rd crimson eyeball on his forehead. It glowed with a dark crimson light. His gaze enveloped the void, sweeping across 1,000,000 miles with a single glance. He could see through all illusions and disguises. In less than a minute, he had searched a radius of 100 million miles. It was also at this moment that he finally saw Ji Tianxing, who was flying 60 million miles away. Swoosh! Instantly, the Avatar's 3rd eyeball emitted an even more blinding red light. Without any hesitation, the Avatar immediately traversed the void and pounced towards Ji Tianxing. He was extremely fast, like an aurora streaking across the sky. In a second, he traversed a distance of 1,000,000 miles. The next moment, his body shimmered with golden light as he traversed another 1,000,000 miles with a single step. This speed was hundreds of times faster than Ji Tianxing, Yin Shuiyin, and Dubby's teleporting. This was the might of a godly monarch's avatar. Furthermore, the avatar only had 10% of his strength in the celestial world. After descending into the mortal world, the avatar's strength was suppressed by the heavenly Tao laws. It was only 100th of the godly monarch's strength. Even so, he was still incomparably terrifying and exceeded the imagination of mortals. Yun Shuiyin and Dubby stood on the Black Dragon battleship. When they saw this scene, they immediately revealed looks of shock and confusion. Heavens! Lord God King's avatar actually had such a terrifying divine ability? He can teleport 1,000,000 miles in a second? How terrifying is that? Dubby was shocked and excited. His eyes flickered with fanatical worship. Yin Shuiyin was relatively calm as she explained calmly. His Majesty's avatar only has 10 to 20% of his strength. After descending into the mortal world, his strength will be suppressed by the heavenly Tao laws. He will be extremely weak. In the celestial world, the godly monarch can teleport close to 100,000,000 miles in a second. He can traverse an entire region in 2 hours. Heavens! Dubby exclaimed once again. The worship on his face intensified. Yin Shuiyin stared intently at the godly monarch's avatar. She watched as he streaked through the void towards the east. She frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, she suddenly guessed something and her eyes lit up. Dubby, hurry up and steer the Black Dragon warship. Let's chase after them and take a look. Tian Shu was taken aback and asked uncertainly, with our speed, how can we possibly catch up to the Divine King's clone? As Yin Shuiyin pulled him back to the battleship, she explained, the godly monarch's avatar flew east as though he was chasing something. Clearly, something happened. Mother guesses that the Divine King's clone must have discovered Ji Tianxing's whereabouts. When Tianshu heard this, he was so excited that his blood was boiling. He secretly clenched his fist and said, just as I expected? That's great. Mother, let's hurry over right now. I want to see Ji Tianxing being killed by the Divine King's clone with my own eyes. After that, Sky Pivot entered the ship without hesitation and steered the ship toward the east. Ji Tianxing was speeding through the void. After flying for tens of thousands of miles, he realized that the situation was not good. A faintly discernible, dangerous aura came from the void in the distance, lingering around his body. He felt a chill run down his spine as he subconsciously turned back to look. He saw the Divine King's clone chasing after him at an extremely terrifying speed. Damn it, that's just a clone. How can it have such a powerful divine will? I'm about 60 million miles away from him. How can he discover me? Ji Tianxing knew very well that the range of a peak Divine King's divine will was the distance he could teleport within 3 breaths. It was about 150 million miles. The Divine King's clone in the void had less than 10% of the Divine King's actual strength. The clone's divine will's range did not exceed 15 million miles at most. It was precisely because of this that he was extremely safe when he was 60 million miles away from the Divine King's clone. However, he never expected that the Divine King's clone would still discover him. Damn it, I really can't use common sense to estimate the Heaven Punisher race's backer. How could that doppelganger's divine sense detect me? Could it be that the third divine eye on his forehead has a special effect? It must be so. Just as these thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, the distance between the two of them was shortened by another few million miles. Ji Tianxing estimated that even if he fled with all his might, he would be caught in 100 breaths at most. Whether it was flying at full speed or teleporting, it would be useless. Moreover, that Divine King's clone's strength clearly surpassed the Heaven God realm. Ji Tianxing felt even more pressure. He knew that he was no match for that Divine King's clone and could only think of other ways. However, no matter how he thought about it, other than the Heavenly Star Shuttle, there was no other way to escape. It looks like I can only use the Heavenly Star Shuttle and jumped to the nearest star to escape the Divine King's clone's pursuit. Thinking of this, he took out the Heavenly Star Shuttle from his interspatial ring and held it in his hand. He turned back to look at the void. That Divine King's clone was still chasing after him. It was only 40 million miles away. Ji Tianxing gritted his teeth and prepared to activate the Heavenly Star Shuttle. However, at this moment, he thought of another problem. Right, I don't recognize which Divine King that clone belongs to. However, many Divine Kings in the upper realm recognize me. The current Ji Tianxing was exactly the same as Kenshin back then. Regardless of appearance, figure, gaze, or temperament, they were all carved from the same mold. Moreover, after Ji Tianxing fused with the Divine King's blood left behind back then, even his aura was 80% similar to Kenshin's. One did not need to think with their toes to know that that Divine King's clone was very powerful and definitely possessed remarkable abilities. If he recognized his identity, it would definitely not be a good thing. Therefore, Ji Tianxing hurriedly executed the celestial dragon tyrant body and turned into a 10,000 feet tall golden giant. This way, his outer appearance was like that of the dragon human race and had nothing to do with Kenshin at all. Moreover, his divine power also changed and possessed a strong dragon aura. This move was indeed effective. 40 million miles away, the Divine King's clone's 3 eyes were fixed on Ji Tianxing the whole time. Suddenly seeing Ji Tianxing transform, the Divine King's clone was also stunned for a moment. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Dragon body? Divine dragon aura? Why would the dragon human race of the dragon realm appear in the mortal world? The Divine King's clone muttered to himself, full of doubts. Of course, he was speaking the language of the divine world, which was ancient and obscure. If I'm still recognized by that Divine King's clone, even after I've transformed into this, then it's considered my fate. After the transformation ended, Ji Tianxing muttered and channeled his majestic divine power into the Heavenly Star Shuttle. Instantly, the Heavenly Star Shuttle released a dazzling starlight that enveloped Ji Tianxing's body. Swoosh! In the next instant, he disappeared from the void. The Heavenly Star Shuttle formed a mysterious connection with the nearest star and brought him through space, directly appearing on that star. Swoosh! With a flash of starlight, Ji Tianxing left the void and appeared on the star. However, when he saw the scene around him clearly, his expression changed, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why am I back again? Chapter 2738. Ji Tianxing had only used the Heavenly Star Shuttle twice. Based on the previous 2 experiences, he roughly understood the function of the Heavenly Star Shuttle. It was to bring him across space and teleport him to the nearest star. In a vast void, this Heavenly Star Shuttle was indeed the best escape tool. Ji Tianxing thought that the Heavenly Star Shuttle should have teleported him to a barren star hundreds of millions of miles away. At that time, even if the Divine King's clone desperately chased after him, he would still have a chance to escape. But he never thought that the heavens would play a joke on him. The Heavenly Star Shuttle actually sent him back to planet Heaven. All around him was shattered earth. Behind him were collapsed mountains. In the distance were surging waves. Red lava was spewing out from the cracks in the earth under his feet. Such a harsh environment was like the end of the world. Where else could this be but planet Heaven? Motherf asterisk Kerr. It really teleported me to the nearest star. Even Ji Tianxing, who had always been calm and collected, could not help but curse. Moreover, he emphasized the words nearest as if he was angry and helpless. Just now, he was only a few million miles away from planet Heaven in the void. The nearest star to him was indeed planet Heaven. There was nothing wrong with it. Ji Tianxing had a headache, but there was nothing he could do. After all, the Heavenly Star Shuttle was not a Heavenly Star Shuttle that he had refined, and he had only used it twice. Strictly speaking, he did not know much about the Heavenly Star Shuttle. It was reasonable for such a blunder to occur. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had temporarily escaped the pursuit of the Divine King's clone, but he did not dare to slack off. He hurriedly dived underground and flew in the opposite direction. He could not stay on planet Heaven. Sooner or later, he would be found by the Divine King's clone. The most important thing now was to escape from the other side of planet Heaven as soon as possible. After diving underground, Ji Tianxing used the power of the realm and instantly teleported millions of miles away, traveling rapidly underground. Unfortunately, he had only refined 40% of the power of the realm. If it was like the Five Elements realm, he could completely control it. Or if he was in the core of the world, he could use the power of the world to directly move to the westernmost point of planet Heaven FA. In that case, he would be 700 million miles away from the Godly Monarch's clone. No matter what, it was impossible for the Divine King's clone to catch up to him. The God King's avatar was speeding through the void, rapidly closing in on Ji Tianxing. However, he did not expect that Ji Tianxing would disappear into thin air. The sudden turn of events startled him, causing him to stop in midair. He frowned and scanned the surrounding tens of millions of miles, but didn't see Ji Tianxing. This caused him to reveal a puzzled and surprised expression as he muttered to himself. This person actually disappeared into thin air? Could it be that he had used a spatial artifact to escape? No. How could a divine artifact from the mortal world teleport 60 million miles? That kid is most likely hiding. Wait for this emperor to search, and I'll definitely be able to drag him out. After saying this, the third eye on the God King avatar's forehead began to emit a dazzling red light as it began to search the void. In just a short while, his divine eye had already searched 60 million miles. The result made him even more surprised. Ji Tianxing had actually disappeared completely. Damn it, that kid actually escaped from under my nose? Impossible. He must be hiding somewhere. The God King's avatar muttered to himself as he scanned the surroundings with a sharp gaze. Suddenly, his gaze landed on the Heaven Punisher planet that was quietly floating a few million miles away from his feet. He had already searched the surrounding 60 million miles, but he had overlooked the Heaven Punisher planet. The God King's avatar raised his eyebrows and suddenly had a thought. The most dangerous place is the safest place. No one would believe that the kid would escape back to the Heaven Punisher planet, right? When he thought of this, the God King's avatar sneered as he turned around and flew back to the Heaven Punisher planet. Swoosh! In just a few breaths' time, he had only taken 6 steps and stepped into the Heaven Punisher planet. Then, the God King's avatar stood high in the sky and released thousands of strands of divine consciousness that merged with heaven and earth. A God King elite had unbelievable power and divine abilities. He could see through the mysteries of an entire planet in just a few breaths' time. Although the God King's avatar only had 1% of the original body's power, he had supreme divine abilities. It was very easy for him to see through the mysteries of the Heaven Punisher planet. In just 5 breaths' time, the God King's avatar sensed a strong dragon tribe aura in a certain area on the continent east of the Heaven Punisher planet. I guessed right. That cunning little bastard really escaped back to the Heaven Punisher planet. Swoosh! He used his divine ability without hesitation and instantly teleported 90 million miles away. The power of the mortal world is simply too weak and thin. My avatar has only 1% of the original body's power, but it can still teleport close to 100 million miles away. Haha, that damn dragon human brat. I'd like to see how you're going to escape from me. The God King's avatar sneered. In just a few breaths' time, he had teleported to the target area. He appeared on a shattered piece of land. Behind him was a mountain range that had turned into ruins, and in front of him was a chaotic sea. The God King's avatar stood on the spot and released his divine consciousness to investigate carefully for 10 breaths' time. Then his divine consciousness found that there was a large amount of divine dragon aura underground that formed a straight line to the west. This kid is not stupid. He guessed that I would track him here, so he went to the west of the Heaven Punisher planet. But so what? He will still die in the end. The God King's avatar sneered. He used his teleportation divine ability again and chased after him 90 million miles away. As time passed, the distance between the two of them quickly shortened. After 100 breaths' time, the distance between the God King's avatar and Ji Tianxing had shortened to 8 million miles. At this moment, the God King's avatar's divine consciousness had already locked onto Ji Tianxing. His appearance, temperament, and divine power were all memorized by the God King's avatar. As long as Ji Tianxing was still on the Heaven Punisher planet, the God King's avatar would be able to catch up to him no matter where he went. No matter where he hid, the God King's avatar would be able to find him. Ji Tianxing also sensed danger approaching and sensed the God King's avatar's aura. His face became gloomy, and he was a little anxious as he thought about how to get rid of the God King's avatar. On the other side in the void, Yun Shuiyan and Tian Shu were steering the Black Dragon battleship and wanted to follow the God King's avatar to check out the situation. Seeing the God King's avatar turn around and fly back to the Heaven Punisher planet, the mother and son were confused and quickly turned around. At the same time, in the void 100 million miles away from the Heaven Punisher planet, a black battleship was silently approaching. It was the Tianxing battleship. Bai Long was steering the battleship at full speed. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wuhin, and Ji Wushuang had already put on their Origin Stone Divine armors and took out their Origin Stone Divine weapons. Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Azure Li, and Lan Kuan, the 4 divine beasts, were also rubbing their palms and looking eager. End of this chapter. Chapter 2739. A quarter of an hour passed quickly. Ji Tianxing had already traveled 300 million miles underground and arrived at the center of the Heaven Punisher planet. At this moment, he was traveling through the dark rock layers 10,000 miles underground. Unfortunately, the God King's clone had already caught up. He was 30,000 miles behind him. This distance was already very close to the God King's clone. "Aunt, I have arrived in the mortal world. Why don't you stop and accept your death?" The God King's clone glared at Ji Tianxing and roared in a dignified tone. Even though he was speaking in the common language of the God realm, Ji Tianxing could understand him. He immediately frowned and thought to himself, Which God King in the God realm would dare to call himself that? This person is really arrogant and conceited. In the God realm, true gods and heavenly gods often refer to themselves as I. Divine lords refer to themselves as I or I, while God kings refer to themselves as I or I. Ji Tianxing had been in the God realm for hundreds of years, but he had never heard the term I. However, he pretended not to hear the God King's clone's angry shout and increased his speed to escape. The God King's clone's eyes were cold and indifferent. He looked at Ji Tianxing as if he was looking at a dead man. "Ignorant ant, go to hell." This time, he spoke in the language of the Heaven Punisher tribe so that Ji Tianxing could understand him. As he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his right hand and grabbed at Ji Tianxing. Boom! Suddenly, the rock layers and soil around Ji Tianxing condensed into an extremely hard wall and pressed down on him. Lava shot out from the depths of the ground under his feet and was about to swallow him up. The God King's clone had already mastered all kinds of divine Tao laws. He could control heaven and earth with a raise of his hand. On this planet, he was an omnipotent god. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion erupted from underground. The rocks, mud, and magma within 30,000 miles collided with one another, drowning Ji Tianxing's figure in it. The terrifying force of the collision turned the ground within a radius of 30,000 miles into dust. A destructive shockwave erupted from the ground, turning the area within a radius of 100,000 miles into a vacuum. The God King's avatar believed that this casual move of his could instantly kill Ji Tianxing. However, his divine telekinesis detected that the terrifying magma, mud, and rock did not harm Ji Tianxing at all. Ji Tianxing was like a transparent phantom, allowing the magma and mud to pass through his body without any delay. Amidst the earth-shattering explosions, he used the power of the world to teleport another 6 million kilometers. The godly king's avatar's divine sense had always covered the surrounding tens of millions of miles. Of course, he could see that Ji Tianxing had escaped unharmed, appearing in the depths of the underground 6 million li away. This result caused him to furrow his brows and reveal an expression of disbelief. Such an ant actually managed to dodge my attack. Did he master the laws of Earth? No wonder he can travel freely underground and ignore my attack. A mere true god can also master the laws of Earth and control the power of the Heaven Punisher planet. This kid is quite capable. No wonder he can force the Heaven Punisher race to such an extent. The God King's avatar thought for a moment and understood the reason. He was quite shocked. Even his chosen representative in the mortal world, the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor, did not have this ability. The God King's avatar teleported again and crossed more than 6 million li in one step to block Ji Tianqing's path. Take this! The God King's avatar roared angrily. He suddenly raised his palms and smacked down on Ji Tianqing's head. Instantly, a pair of enormous golden palms covered the sky and engulfed Ji Tianqing's figure. Under the divine golden light, everything within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was sealed. The space also froze like ice. Even if Ji Tianqing wanted to teleport away, he could not. At this critical moment, he could only cast a spell to block. Lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, Ji Tianqing roared and immediately used the laws of Earth. He absorbed the divine power within hundreds of thousands of miles to form a giant dark yellow shield to protect himself. Boom! Crack! In the next instant, the two enormous palms smashed down and hit him. Following an earth-shattering explosion, the dark yellow shield was smashed into pieces on the spot, splashing out countless fragments. Ji Tianqing was also smashed deep into the ground. He was trapped in a torrent of lava tens of thousands of miles underground. The violent shockwave turned everything within 100,000 li to dust, creating a giant underground hole. The ground also shook violently, as if there was a super earthquake. Ji Tianqing had used all his strength to block the God King's avatar's attack. However, the God King's avatar was too powerful. It was more than 20 times more powerful than him. In the end, he was still injured. His internal organs were damaged, and his divine power was in chaos. Cough, cough. He coughed violently, and golden divine blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. His face was slightly pale. He hurriedly circulated his energy to suppress his injuries. Fortunately, he maintained the heavenly dragon tyrant body state. His defensive power was very strong. Otherwise, that move just now could have seriously injured him. The God King's avatar originally thought that the battle was over. But when he scanned with his divine will, he discovered that Ji Tianqing only suffered some light injuries. He immediately frowned. His third eyeball flashed with red light. This emperor really misjudged. This mixed-blood bastard is only a half-step celestial deity, but he has strength comparable to a level 5 celestial deity. He was a rare genius that no one had ever seen before in this world. In comparison, Tian Shu, that punk, is too inferior. At this moment, the God King's avatar suddenly had a different thought. He could not quite bear to kill Ji Tianqing. He was invincible in the divine world and had seen countless breathtaking geniuses. But someone like Ji Tianqing, living in the lowly mortal world and not dying after taking 2 of his moves with the body of an ant, was one of a kind. The God King's avatar dared to conclude that in the trichiliocosm, this dragon-human punk before him was absolutely the most monstrous genius. Even in the divine world, where geniuses were as common as clouds, he was also one of the top geniuses. His future achievements were limitless. If not for this punk going against this emperor would have taken him in as a disciple. The God King's avatar muttered to himself. Once again, he waved his palm and fired out a divine golden light toward Ji Tianqing. This time, he still held back like before and did not use his full strength. He was not in a hurry to kill Ji Tianqing. Instead, he wanted to see what other moves Ji Tianqing had. 2 mountain-sized golden palms, condensed like metal and stone, slammed toward the sea of lava with unparalleled divine might. Ji Tianqing was in the sea of lava. He had just suppressed the injuries of his internal organs and was about to teleport away. Suddenly, he saw 2 giant palms slamming toward him. Without hesitation, he pulled out the Burial of Heaven and stabbed out with his strongest attack. Heaven-piercing sword. The burial of heaven instantly swelled to 10,000 feet long, emitting a dazzling golden divine light as it pierced toward the two giant palms. Boom! Crack! In the next instant, the sword light and the giant palms collided fiercely. An earth-shattering boom erupted, spreading across a radius of 100,000 miles. The golden palms and sword light collapsed at the same time, bursting out millions of golden light fragments, blasting a huge pit of 100,000 miles in the sea of lava. Chapter 2740. A loud noise shook the heavens, and crimson lava splashed everywhere. The depths of the earth were in chaos, and a terrifying earthquake was also triggered on the surface. Ji Tianxing was once again sent flying backward, crashing into the sea of lava with a rumble. The injuries to his internal organs had just been suppressed, and he was severely injured again. He couldn't help but spit out 2 mouthfuls of golden divine blood, and he panted violently. Seeing that the Divine King's clone was about to attack again, he had no time to circulate his energy to suppress his injuries. He could only absorb the life-saving divine light of the heaven-mending pearl. Swoosh! The dense white light entered his internal organs, and he immediately recovered to his original state. When the Divine King's clone raised his fists and blasted out 2 mountain-sized fist lights, he didn't hesitate to control the power of the world and leave the ground. Swoosh! With a flash of light, he flew to a height of 90,000 miles in the sky. Deep underground, the 2 destructive fist lights brazenly blasted into the sea of lava, and a deafening loud noise erupted. A huge pit was blasted out of the sea of lava, and the surrounding rock layers also collapsed one after another. The Divine King's clone's attack missed, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful sneer, and he said, "Haha, interesting." In the next instant, he also teleported to a height of 90,000 miles in the sky, and once again swung his palm at Ji Tianxing. 2 huge golden light blades, as if splitting heaven and earth, attacked Ji Tianxing. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth within a radius of 100,000 miles was sucked dry. The space in this area was also confined. Ji Tianxing's aura was locked onto by the light blades, and he couldn't dodge or teleport away. Even if he used the power of the world, it was useless. The Divine King's clone's methods were so powerful, and it was already within his expectations, so he didn't find it strange at all. At the critical moment, he could only grit his teeth and resist, casting a technique to resist. Sword of Life. He used all his strength and swung the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and stabbed out with his strongest sword. The sword light, which seemed to fly from the sky, carried a majestic and mighty divine might, and instantly slashed the 2 light blades. Boom! Crack! The golden light blade and sword light collapsed at the same time, and fragments scattered all over the sky. The violent shockwave sent Ji Tianxing flying thousands of miles away. His chest heaved up and down rapidly. The Divine King's clone did not move at all. He stared at Ji Tianxing with a strange light in his eyes. He thought to himself, "This child's sword technique is quite interesting. It doesn't seem like it can be grasped by a true god. Could it be that this boy obtained some fortuitous encounter and learned the sword Tao of an ancient divine lord?" With this thought in mind, he once again brandished his fists and legs, striking out with overwhelming fist radiance and leg shadows, attacking Ji Tianxing like a violent storm. 100,000 miles of heaven and earth were enveloped by the divine golden light. This time, the God King's avatar used 60% of his strength. He decided to put more pressure on Ji Tianxing and force him to reveal more of his trump cards. He was looking forward to what other surprises Ji Tianxing could bring him. The pressure on Ji Tianxing suddenly increased. He could only erupt with his strongest power and go all out to fight back. His left hand brandished his fist and palm, while his right hand brandished his sword and slashed repeatedly. At the same time, he displayed fist art, palm art, and sword Tao divine abilities, tangling with the God King's avatar. Furthermore, his footwork changed nonstop. His figure flashed and shifted high up in the sky, constantly dodging the fist radiance and leg shadows that filled the sky. Instantly, 100,000 miles of heaven and earth became chaotic. Following the collision of the two people's divine abilities, loud rumbling sounds lingered on incessantly. Apocalyptic divine power shockwaves also spread out like ripples. However, Ji Tianqing was ultimately not the God King's avatar's match and was completely suppressed. The two people had only exchanged several dozen moves when he was struck in the back by a fist radiance. He was sent flying out while vomiting blood. Before he could land on the ground, another shadow of a leg swept over and sent him flying 1,000 miles away. Even if he was in the heavenly dragon tyrant body state, the two people's strength disparity was too great. They were not on the same realm at all. In just these two moves, he was severely injured by the God King's avatar. His aura was clearly much weaker. Only this bit of ability? A little disappointing. The God King's avatar furrowed his brows, a hint of disappointment flashing across his eyes. But right at this moment, the heavily injured Ji Tianqing absorbed a ray of life-saving divine light. His injuries immediately recovered as good as new. He became full of energy again, manipulating the power of the world and blasting a punch at the God King's avatar, slashing out a heaven-splitting giant sword. Seeing this scene, the God King's avatar's eyes lit up, revealing a playful smile. Oh, recovered from his injuries in a blink of an eye? This kid still has a trump card. Could it be that he also grasped the longevity path's divine abilities? In the vast divine world, 3,000 great Daos were passed down, evolving into thousands of divine abilities and mystic arts. The longevity path was one of the 3,000 great Daos. Deities who cultivated this great Dao paid the most attention to prolonging their lifespan, strengthening their divine bodies and divine souls. At the same time, deities who cultivated this Dao tended to grasp many divine abilities and mystic arts that could heal injuries quickly. Several of the strongest people in the longevity path reached the God King realm and even had the heaven-defying effect of reviving the dead. Therefore, when the God King's avatar saw Ji Tianqing's transformation, he associated it with the longevity path. A mere ant from a mortal world is actually a dragon human. Not only did he grasp heavenly god-level laws, but he also cultivated the unfathomable sword Dao divine abilities and longevity path divine abilities. I really want to see if you're reincarnated from the upper realm, kid. The God King's avatar could not help but suspect that a monster like Ji Tianqing could not possibly be born in the mortal world. He was most likely the reincarnation of an upper realm expert. Since that was the case, all the more he had to investigate Ji Tianqing's background. Therefore, the God King's avatar used 70% of his strength. His body transformed into dozens of light shadows, pouncing toward Ji Tianqing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, the sky was filled with his illusions. Thousands of fist lights, leg shadows, and sword lights also burst forth with supreme divine might, pouring down like a torrential rain. Ji Tianqing narrowed his eyes, his expression incomparably solemn. He could only block and retreat into the distance. Just as Ji Tianqing and the God King's avatar were fighting, the Black Dragon battleship had also returned to Planet Trader. Yin Shuiyin and Tian Shu could guess that there must be a reason for the God King's avatar to enter Planet Trader. However, they were weak and could not detect the God King's avatar's aura, nor did they know where he was. The mother and son discussed for a moment, then decided to return to the Emperor God Palace to stabilize the situation. At this moment, Tianqing's battleship arrived as scheduled and was about to enter Planet Trader. Inside the battleship, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the two children all had solemn expressions, revealing worried expressions. Ji Ku held the divine spear in his hand and said in a low voice, "Before Brother Tianqing carried out the plan, he asked us to stay in the Five Elements world and wait for his news. However, half a month has passed, and he has not returned, nor has he sent a message. Half an hour ago, I sent him a communication jade slip, but he hasn't replied yet. All signs indicate that he must have encountered some trouble or even fallen into a predicament. We have to help him as soon as possible." Everyone nodded in unison to express their understanding. Yun Yao nodded slightly and said, "I have a trace of connection with Tianxing, and I can sense his aura. He should be on Planet Trader. However, Planet Trader is too big, and we don't have that much time to search. Therefore, we have to go directly to the Emperor God Palace of the Heaven Trader and find Yin Shuiyin in Tianshu." Chapter 2741. Swoosh. Under Bailong's control, the Tianxing battleship entered the planet of Heaven Killer at an extremely fast speed. Soon, the Tianxing battleship stopped 10,000 miles above the ground. Jika flew out of the battleship in a flash and landed on the ground below. On the shattered ground, there was a city that had collapsed into ruins. Many members of the Heaven Killer were fleeing outside the city, and countless injured people were wailing inside the city. Not far away, 2 Heaven Killer battleships sped over. They were the soldiers of the Heaven Killer race who had been ordered to rescue the injured and comfort the people. However, as soon as the 2 battleships flew over the ruins, they were pierced by 2 spear shadows that fell from the sky. Boom! Boom! The fiery red spear shadows destroyed the 2 battleships on the spot and blew them into pieces. The black-armored warriors in the battleships were blown to smithereens. The remaining 2 martial gods in golden armor were severely injured too. Blood was gushing out of their bodies. The 2 of them were furious and terrified. They quickly pulled out their swords and sabers and vigilantly searched for the enemy. But neither of them found anything. Jiku descended from the sky and teleported behind one of the martial gods, knocking him out with a spear strike. The other martial god reacted and turned around to run without hesitation. Jiku chased after him and swept her spear again, knocking the martial god unconscious. Then, she carried the 2 unconscious martial gods and returned to the battleship high in the sky. Plop! Plop! Jiku entered the battleship and threw the 2 martial gods on the ground. Bailong couldn't wait any longer. He immediately used the soul-searching technique to seize the memories of the 2 martial gods. Everyone remained silent and looked at him expectantly. After 100 breaths of time, White Dragon finished casting the spell and opened his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. He casually threw out 2 balls of divine flame and burned the 2 martial gods to ashes. "Bailong, have you found anything? Where is the Arch Palace of the Heaven Killer race?" Yin Yao and Jiku both asked. Bailong pointed to the west and said with a smile, "The Emperor God Palace is in the Endless Sea region, above the sky where the clouds gather. One of them doesn't know anything, while the other knows the approximate location of the Arch Palace." Jiku nodded and urged, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go." White Dragon did not waste any more time and hurriedly drove the battleship to the Endless Sea domain at the fastest speed. Fortunately, they were lucky enough to land not far away from the sea. In just a short 4 hours, the Tianxing battleship arrived above the sea and began searching through the vast sea of clouds. Not only did they search with their eyes, but they also released their divine consciousness to cover a radius of 90,000 miles to find the whereabouts of the Arch Palace. It didn't take long for Yun Yao to get the results. 90,000 miles to the left, a magnificent palace stood in the sea of clouds. She pointed out the direction, and White Dragon hurriedly piloted the warship and flew over. When the battleship approached the Imperial God Palace, White Dragon activated the formation and made the battleship invisible. The battleship flew silently to the Imperial God Palace, and everyone secretly checked the situation in the Imperial God Palace. Although Planet Heaven Destroyer had suffered a disaster and half of the planet had been reduced to ruins, the Imperial God Palace above the Sea of Clouds was protected by a heavenly God-level formation, so it was still intact. However, it was chaotic inside and outside the Imperial God Palace. Thousands of Heaven Destroyer battleships were flying in and out in a hurry. Of course, most of them departed from the Imperial God Palace and headed to various continents. In the Imperial God Palace, there were batches of Heaven Destroyer soldiers who quickly gathered and boarded the battleships to leave. Even the guards guarding the Imperial God Palace were extremely busy. They were shuttling back and forth, as if they were carrying out some mission. Looking at the situation, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others guessed the reason. Planet Heaven Destroyer must have suffered a disaster. The continents are in chaos, and the people are in a terrible situation. Countless Heaven Destroyer soldiers have gathered in the Imperial God Palace, and they are now rushing to various continents to provide relief. Although those Heaven Destroyer soldiers are very busy, as if they are rushing to be reincarnated, they are not in a mess. This means that there are experts guarding the Imperial God Palace, and they are giving orders in an orderly manner. Bai Long nodded in agreement. He sneered and said, "The Heaven Destroyer clan is now an arrow at the end of its flight, and they are on the verge of extinction. The only experts who can stand on the stage are Yun Shuiyin, Tian Shu, and her son. In my opinion, that pair of mother and son should be in the Imperial God Palace. Let's kill our way in, destroy the Imperial God Palace, and capture Yun Shuiyin and her son. Then we will know where Master is." Ji Tianxing was not around, so Yun Yao was the backbone of everyone. She nodded slightly in agreement and said in a serious tone, "Although only Yun Shuiyin and Tian Shu can pose a threat to us, there are hundreds of thousands of Heaven Destroyer soldiers in the Imperial God Palace. However, there are at least hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the Divine Palace. We have to be careful and have a clear plan and goal to succeed. I will now assign the tasks, and everyone must do their best to complete them." Then, Yin Yao assigned the tasks to everyone. She and Ji Ku charged into the Imperial God Palace and worked together to break the defensive array. Their main goal was to deal with Tian Shu and Yin Shuiyin. Ji Wuhin and Ji Wushuang followed Bai Long and charged into the Imperial God Palace from the side. Their mission was to destroy the battleships as soon as possible. The four divine beasts entered from the side and the back, and they were responsible for eliminating the guards and soldiers in the Imperial God Palace. After the miscellaneous fish were cleared, everyone gathered in the center of the Imperial God Palace. No one had any objections, and they immediately set off. Swoosh! With a flash, Yin Yao and Ji Ku flew out of the battleship. Both of them were wearing pitch-black source stone battle armors. They held source stone swords and divine spears as they flew straight to the main gate of the Imperial God Palace. There were hundreds of battleships and thousands of Heaven Destroyer soldiers gathered outside the gate. However, the two of them remained invisible and used a secret technique to observe the defensive array. Then they began to crack it. Many years ago, Ji Tianxing had taught them how to crack the powerful divine array of the Heaven Destroyer clan. Now, both of them were half-step heavenly gods and had heavenly god-level source stone divine weapons. It was a piece of cake for them to crack the defensive array of the Imperial God Palace. 100 seconds later, with a loud crack, Yin Yao and Ji Ku broke a hole in the heavenly god array protecting the Imperial God Palace. On the purple light screen that had a radius of hundreds of miles, a 10 miles long and thousands of meters wide gully appeared. Violent purple godly power seeped out of the gap and fell into the sea of clouds. The Heaven Destroyer soldiers outside the gate were stunned. Then, everyone roared and exclaimed as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Yin Yao and Ji Ku attacked decisively. They swung their swords and spears and drowned thousands of Heaven Destroyer soldiers. Boom! 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 A deafening explosion immediately exploded in the sea of clouds, causing the Emperor God Palace to shake endlessly. With one move, more than 3,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punishing Army were killed on the spot. There were deafening roars and roars in the Imperial God Palace, as well as ear-piercing alarms. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the four divine beasts went through the gap and got into the array. They quickly rushed to the side and the back of the Imperial God Palace. Chapter 2742. Yin Yao had already assigned the tasks. Everyone and the four divine beasts each had their own tasks, tried to achieve the goal in the shortest time possible. The four divine beasts rushed into the Arch Palace and rushed to the right and back. They bumped into thousands of Heaven Punishing Guards, who were rushing to the main gate to provide support. The four mythological beasts didn't hesitate at all. They immediately released a destructive divine light that slaughtered hundreds of guards. Many guards were shocked. They couldn't care less about the gate and immediately attacked the four divine beasts. Qian Yu and Lu Li stayed to deal with more than 6,000 guards. Black Dragon and Lan Kuan rushed out of the encirclement and rushed to the back of the Arch Palace. On the other side, on the left side of the Arch Palace, Bai Long drove the battleship and flew out of the purple light shield with Ji Wuhan and Ji Wuxuan. They didn't rush in from the gate, because Bai Long was confident that he could break the divine formation. He controlled the Tianqing battleship and activated the two main cannons at the front of the battleship, aiming at the purple light shield. Kaboom! As the two dazzling golden light beams blasted out, the purple light shield was immediately blasted open and endless debris splashed out. The incomparably violent impact caused the entire light barrier to tremble. The two dazzling golden light beams also didn't dissipate. They passed through the purple light shield and blasted into the Arch Palace. With a muffled rumble, several palaces collapsed and turned into ruins. Naturally, more than 1,000 guards and servants died on the spot and were blasted into powder by the dazzling golden light beams. Swoosh! The Tianqing battleship was as fast as lightning. It passed through the gap in the formation and rushed into the Arch Palace. At this time, a large number of guards and soldiers rushed out of the Arch Palace with murderous intent. Seeing the Tianqing battleship break into the Arch Palace, everyone immediately locked onto the target and attacked the battleship. However, the overwhelming purple light blades and all kinds of divine powers and secret arts couldn't do anything to the Tianqing battleship. They couldn't even leave a mark on the battleship, let alone damage it. On the other hand, the divine cannons on both sides of the battleship opened up and shot out dazzling golden light beams, blasting the guards and soldiers of the heaven-conquering army into pieces. The Tianqing battleship at full power was simply the most violent killing machine. Not only were thousands of guards and heaven-punishing soldiers killed, but they were also forced to flee in panic. Even the palaces and buildings within a radius of dozens of miles were blasted into ruins by the beams of light, leaving only deep pits and broken walls. The battle at the entrance of the Emperor God Palace was the most intense. Yin Yao wielded her sword with both hands and multitasked. She executed two types of Sword Dao divine arts at the same time, spraying out sword lights that blotted out the sky. With her as the center, the surrounding area was filled with sword light. She was like a moving hurricane of blades, violently sweeping across the battlefield. All the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army that were swept by the hurricane were crushed into pieces, and blood rained down from the sky. Ji Ku wielded the Origin Stone divine spear and started a massacre in the sky. Hundreds of heaven-punishing battleships were gathered here, ready to set off, but they were all destroyed by her. With a wave of the divine spear, monstrous divine flames poured down, drowning many soldiers of the heaven-punishing army and burning them to ashes in an instant. With a thrust of the divine spear, the terrifying spear shadows enveloped many battleships and pierced them into sieves in the blink of an eye. They were like piles of scrap metal. The two war goddesses used all their strength and unleashed destructive power that could destroy the world. The surrounding battleships and soldiers of the heaven-punishing army couldn't stop them at all and were quickly slaughtered. The battle lasted for about 15 minutes. More than half of the 800 battleships were destroyed. Only 200 battleships escaped from the Emperor God Palace and escaped the disaster. About 40,000 soldiers of the heaven-punishing army were also slaughtered. The rest either fled the Emperor God Palace with the battleships or supported other places. More than 10,000 soldiers of the heaven-punishing army stayed near the main entrance. However, they were terrified and didn't dare to face Yin Yao and Ji Ku head-on. They could only retreat into the Emperor God Palace. When the situation was critical and the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army lost their will to fight, an earth-shattering roar came from the depths of the Emperor God Palace. Ji Tianqing's henchmen, you're digging your own grave. As the roar came, a tall figure covered in purple flames flew out from the depths of the Emperor God Palace. Swish! In the blink of an eye, the figure arrived above the square. That person was 10 feet tall and his body was black and covered with icy blue patterns. His body was full of murderous intent. Without a doubt, he was Tian Shu. Tian Shu had thought that the disaster of the heaven-punishing planet would be over when the Divine King's avatar came to the mortal world. Then, the Divine King's avatar would be invincible and kill Ji Tianxing. That would be the end of the story. If the Divine King's avatar was free, he would meet him and hear him call him master and give him all kinds of divine powers and divine artifacts. That would be perfect. However, things didn't go as planned. Before Tian Shu could finish cleaning up the mess in the Emperor God Palace, Ji Tianxing's henchmen had arrived. How dare they? They must have a death wish. The most infuriating thing was that the 100,000 soldiers, thousands of battleships, and thousands of guards in the Emperor God Palace couldn't defeat Ji Tianxing's henchmen. Tian Shu had no choice but to put down what he was doing and join the battle in person. Other government affairs, such as deploying troops, protecting the heaven-punishing planet, and investigating the whereabouts of the Divine King's avatar, were all left to his mother, Yin Shuiyan. The more than 10,000 heaven-destroying soldiers around the square heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Tian Shu appear in person. They looked as if they had been relieved of a heavy burden. The Thearcha's sun is finally here. That's great. As long as the Thearcha's sun strikes, those two bitches will definitely die. No matter how big the disaster is, don't even think about defeating the heaven-punishing planet. The Thearcha's sun is mighty. Kill those two bastards. Many captains and soldiers of the heaven-punishing army were cheering in high spirits, anticipating the scene of Yin Yao and Ji Ke being killed. Tian Shu didn't waste any time. He summoned the Poseidon's halberd with his right hand and charged toward Ji Ke. Ji Ke was wearing armor and holding a divine spear. Her body was wrapped in divine flames, and she looked the most valiant. Moreover, she specialized in dealing with the heaven-punishing battleships. Her killing power was terrifying. Naturally, she became Tian Shu's primary target. Bitch die! Tian Shu roared and waved the Poseidon's halberd at Ji Ke. In an instant, dozens of purple lights were shot out and more than 30 purple light blades were shot out. Dozens of purple lights burst out with unparalleled power and engulfed Ji Ke's figure. Countless soldiers clapped and cheered for Tian Shu. However, Ji Ke held the divine spear tightly with both hands and instantly shot out hundreds of beams of divine light. She used 4 types of divine flames. Only a burst of pung 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 muffled sounds burst out, and the purple light that filled the sky was defeated, but Ji Ke was safe and sound. Not only that, but she also teleported in front of Tian Shu and stabbed more than 200 times with her divine spear. The sky was covered by divine flames. Tian Shu was shocked and could only block with all his might. However, he was only able to block half of the attacks and was hit by more than 30 spear shadows. He spat out blood and was sent flying. The cheers of the heaven-destroying soldiers in the square suddenly stopped. Their faces were filled with astonishment. Chapter 2743. The square was dead silent. More than 10,000 soldiers of the heaven-punishing army fell silent. No one had expected the result to be like this. In their minds, Tian Shu was the #1 prodigy in the universe, the famous god of war. Other than the emperor and the empress, no one could defeat Tian Shu. However, reality shattered everyone's fantasies and expectations. After exchanging 2 blows with the red-haired woman, Tian Shu was sent flying and spitting out blood. What kind of terrifying power was that? Suddenly, the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army felt their hearts in their mouths. Everyone muttered in their hearts. Ji Tianxing's accomplice was also so powerful that even Tian Shu was no match for her. Moreover, the woman with the dual swords was almost as powerful as the woman with the spear. Didn't this mean that the woman with the dual swords could also defeat Tian Shu easily? Oh my god, both women were so powerful. How could Tian Shu withstand their attacks? If the Empress didn't make a move, Tian Shu would definitely be defeated. Tian Shu also saw the reactions of the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army. He was furious in his murderous intent sword. He was unwilling to admit defeat. He waved the Neptune's halberd again, and charged toward Jiko. He was so fast that he left a series of afterimages in the sky. When he waved the Neptune's halberd with both hands and unleashed an overwhelming amount of purple light, Jiko stared at him with sharp eyes. She found his real body in the sky, full of light and shadows. She found his only flaw and thrust her spear with all her strength. Bang! Another deafening explosion erupted, and the purple light that filled the sky shattered with a bang. Before Tianshu could get close to Jiko, he was sent flying again. His hair was disheveled, and he crashed into a palace. The palace collapsed on the spot. It was smashed into pieces and turned into ruins. A large bloody hole appeared in Tianshu's abdomen. Dark purple blood gushed out of it. Seeing this, the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army on the square were all dumbfounded. They all exclaimed in disbelief. Tianshu was even more furious. He ignored his injuries and waved the Neptune's halberd again toward Jiko. This time, he did not hesitate to use his trump card and unleash his combat strength to the limit. The sea god's halberd swung through the air, and a sky-blotting icy blue wave crashed down upon Jiko's head with devastating power. Jiko was still fearless. He gripped the Source Stone Divine spear tightly with both hands and unleashed 360 spear shadows with all his might. Each spear shadow was over 1,000 zhang long, like a lofty mountain. Moreover, the colors of the spear shadows were dazzling. They were formed from divine flames of different attributes. Golden, crimson, black, purple, and white divine flames exuded terrifying divine might. Boom, 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 boom. In the next moment, the 360 spear shadows collided with the monstrous waves, causing an earth-shaking explosion. Under the horrified gazes of the crowd, the overwhelming ice-blue waves were torn apart by the spear shadows. Then, the icy blue waves evaporated completely, turning into water vapor and dissipating. Tianshu's ultimate killer move was thus dispelled by Jiko. Of the 360 spear shadows, only 300 were destroyed. The remaining 30 or so spear shadows pierced the sky pivot in an incomparably violent manner. Bang! 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 Ah! 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 With a series of screams, Tianshu was sent flying again, rolling 30 miles away. Along the way, he penetrated more than a dozen palaces and plowed a huge gully in the ground. When he fell into the ruins and was buried by countless bricks and tiles, the palaces also collapsed. The scene in front of them caused the heaven-punishing soldiers around the square to reveal expressions of shock and horror. Similar thoughts appeared in everyone's mind. Oh my God, how terrifying is this woman's strength? The Emperor is no match for her at all and has been crushed from the beginning to the end. This is too terrifying. I'm afraid that only the Empress can defeat this woman. Under the horrified gazes of the crowd, Jiko turned into a red stream of light and flew into the depths of the Imperial God Palace, continuing to pursue Tianshu. At the same time, Yin Yao did not stop casting. She was using her ultimate sword technique to kill the soldiers around the square. In a span of 10 breaths, she had already killed more than 2,000 people. When she swung her sword at the crowd again, many soldiers of the Imperial God Palace cried out in alarm and turned to flee in panic. At this moment, another murderous roar exploded from the depths of the Imperial God Palace. Lowly insects, you must be tired of living. As the cold female voice sounded, a graceful figure flew out from the depths of the Imperial God Palace and came to the sky. She was wearing a luxurious ice blue dress, which was 30 feet long and fluttering in the sky, making her look like a fairy who had descended from the 9 heavens. She was 7 feet tall, with a delicate face and a graceful and luxurious aura. She really looked like a mother of the world. Moreover, she was the most powerful person in the Imperial God Palace. Even though she was empty-handed, she still exuded an invisible divine aura that suppressed the entire Imperial God Palace. The soldiers of the Imperial God Palace who were running away in a hurry suddenly found their backbone and stopped running. Everyone gathered together, looking at Yin Yao and Jiko with vigilance. They were secretly on guard. Tian Shu, who was severely injured, also crawled out of the ruins and flew to the sky, standing behind Yin Shuiyin. His body was covered in purple blood, and there were huge bloody holes in his chest and limbs. His bones could be seen clearly. However, he used his divine powers and secret arts. His body flashed with an ice-blue light, and his wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, he could not recover the divine power he had used so quickly, and his mental state was still not good. Tian Shu stared at Ji Ku and Yun Yao with bloodshot eyes and said to Yin Shuiyin, "Mother, I've already investigated. These two lowly servants are Ji Tianxing's accomplices. Moreover, they are Ji Tianxing's wives." As he spoke, Tian Shu's eyes flashed with a cold, bloodthirsty glint. Yin Shuiyin nodded slightly to show that she understood. She said through voice transmission, "Tian Shu, suppress your injuries as soon as possible. Mother will stop them." Tian Shu nodded and acknowledged the order. He was not in a hurry and felt that victory was within his grasp. He believed that the godly king's clone would soon kill Ji Tianxing. It would be best if he and Yin Shuiyin could defeat Ji Tianxing's accomplices. Even if they could not defeat them, they just needed to stall for time. When the godly king's clone arrived, everything would be over. When that happened, the Imperial God Palace would still be the final winner. At that moment, Yin Shuiyin stared coldly at Yun Yao and Ji Ku. She said in a deep voice, "The two of you are quite strong. You don't look like fools, yet you did such a foolish thing. Our clan's backer, the almighty godly king, has already sent a clone to kill Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing is dead for sure, yet you still dare to barge into the Imperial God Palace. Do you want to die with him?" Yin Shuiyin's thoughts were much more complicated than Tian Shu's. She knew that Yun Yao and Ji Ku were very strong, so she was not in a hurry to kill them. Instead, she used a psychological attack. As expected, Yun Yao and Ji Ku's expressions changed when they heard this. Their brows furrowed tightly. Chapter 2744. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and company had come to rescue Ji Tianxing. They had not clearly seen what had happened in the void and the descent of the godly monarch's avatar. Now, their hearts were in their mouths when they heard Yin Shuiyin's words. As the saying went, concern led to confusion. The Heaven Punisher race's backer is indeed an upper realm godly monarch. When the Heaven Punisher planet was facing destruction, the godly monarch actually took action. Even if it's just a godly monarch's avatar, it has the strength of a divine lord. Brother Tianxing is definitely not his match. Yin Yao and Ji Ku looked at each other and secretly communicated with their consciousness. A few years ago, Yin Yao had a premonition of the Heaven Punisher planet's destruction. She saw the future in the illusion and witnessed the intervention of the upper realm's godly monarch, resulting in Ji Tianxing's tragic death and heavy casualties. Now, Ji Tianxing had been missing for more than half a month, and he could not be contacted. Therefore, Yin Yao did not doubt Yin Shuiyin's words. She was only anxious about how to rescue Ji Tianxing. Yin Shuiyin had been staring at Yin Yao and Ji Ku's expressions. When she saw their expressions change slightly, she could not help but sneer inwardly. She continued, "If I'm not wrong, you want to save Ji Tianxing? Unfortunately, you've come to the wrong place. Ji Tianxing is not in the Arch Palace. The two of us do not have the strength to defeat him, nor can we detain him here." What she said was the truth. Yin Yao and Ji Ku also believed her. Yin Shuiyin was even more certain when she saw them remain silent. She continued, "With your intelligence, you should know that fighting with us here is just a waste of time. Take your people and leave. Head to the east of the Heaven Punisher planet. Ji Tianxing is being pursued by the godly monarch's avatar and has long fled to that continent. If you rush there in time, you might be able to collect his corpse." He. Yin Shuiyin's expression was indifferent as she sneered expressionlessly. She was a woman, so of course, she understood women's thoughts. What she had just said struck a chord with Yin Yao and Ji Ku. The two women were a little hesitant as they discussed secretly through voice transmission. There were two things before them. One was to destroy the Arch Palace and kill Yin Shuiyin and her son. Two was to help Ji Tianxing, the godly monarch's avatar. In comparison, Ji Tianxing's safety was not the monarch palace. The two ladies exchanged a few words and prepared to leave the imperial god palace. After all, Yunyao had already used a secret technique to check. Ji Tianxing was indeed not here. But at this moment, Tian Shu, who had just finished treating his injuries, suddenly changed his expression. He glared murderously at Ji Ku and bellowed in a deep voice, "You bitch! How dare you try to run away after wounding me? Wishful thinking. How am I supposed to vent my anger if I don't tear you to pieces today?" As he spoke, Tian Shu could not control his rage. He was about to kill Ji Ku with his Neptune halberd. Yun Shuiyan frowned and shouted, "Stop!" Tian Shu hurriedly stopped and turned to look at her. She asked in confusion, "Mother, what are you doing?" "Those two sluts barged into the Arch Palace and killed so many soldiers. They even severely injured me. How can I let them go?" Tian Shu hated Ji Ku to the core. He wanted nothing more than to grind her bones to dust. How could he let her go? Yun Shuiyan's eyes flashed with disappointment. She sighed inwardly. "Silly child, how can you be so impatient? The godly monarch's avatar has already descended. Victory is already in our hands. We just need to endure for a few more hours. Ji Tianxing, his wives, and henchmen will all be killed by the godly monarch's avatar. We will be able to get through this without breaking a sweat. But you don't know what's good for you. Why do you have to make things difficult now?" Yun Shuiyan's thoughts and wisdom were not something a sheltered flower like Tian Shu could understand. He thought that with the godly monarch's avatar descending, the heaven punishers would be safe. He had nothing to worry about. However, Yun Shuiyan knew very well that even if the godly monarch's avatar killed Ji Tianxing and the others, saving the heaven punishers from danger, it would still take a few more hours. Now that the two war goddesses were here, why should the mother and son take the risk? Unfortunately, Yun Shuiyan could not explain this to Tian Shu in front of Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Her expression did not change. She looked at Tian Shu sternly and ordered, "Tian Shu, your injuries are very serious. Don't force yourself. Return to the palace to recuperate." There was a hidden meaning in her words. She almost ordered Tian Shu to leave. However, Tian Shu was still angry. How could he listen? He retorted without hesitation, "No. Mother, I am an astral war god with a 7-star dazzling divine body. What are these injuries to me? That bitch destroyed hundreds of our battleships and slaughtered tens of thousands of soldiers. Even if I have to bleed on the spot, I will tear her to pieces." Tian Shu's posture was heroic and his voice was forceful. It spread through half of the Arch Palace and made countless soldiers' blood boil. The soldiers who had suffered heavy casualties and were in a sorry state regained their confidence and cheered one after another. Tian Shu was greatly encouraged. He did not listen to Yun Shuiyan's advice. He waved the sea god halberd and attacked Ji Ku. In his mind, with his mother backing him up, wouldn't killing Yun Yao and Ji Ku be as easy as flipping his hand? His mother was the reincarnation of a divine lord who had mastered the coiling dragon 4 seas. She was a mighty figure with 30 times the strength of a peak true god. Chaotic space-time / Tian Shu roared and used the power of the spatial laws. He waved the sea god halberd and shot out hundreds of light blades. Each light blade contained the power of space that could tear the world apart. Hundreds of light blades appeared at the same time and immediately enveloped Ji Ku's body. However, Ji Ku was fearless. She relied on the powerful defense of the Source Stone armor and did not retreat at all. She held the Source Stone divine spear with both hands and used a secret divine power. Sky-killing divine flame. Following her cold shout, her entire body burst forth with a violent aura that could destroy heaven and earth. The Source Stone Divine Spear also released 5-color Divine Fire and formed a 100-mile Divine Flame Spear that smashed towards Tian Shu's head. Swish! The 100-mile-long flaming Divine Spear burned the sky to smithereens, revealing a vast expanse of pitch-black void. Under the endless Divine Flame, tens of thousands of miles were turned into a sea of fire. The temperature was terrifyingly high. Boom! Boom! With a series of earth-shattering explosions, Tianshu's space-time light blades were all shattered by the Divine Flame Spear. The violent Divine Flame Spear shadow smashed towards Tianshu and was about to kill him. At the critical moment, Yin Shuyan's expression changed, and she waved her hand without hesitation. Sky Sealing Palm. She suddenly raised her palms and struck out two giant, icy blue palms that blotted out the sky and grabbed at the Divine Flame Spear shadow. Since Yin Shuyan had attacked, Yin Yao would not sit back and watch. She immediately waved her two swords and attacked. The power of heaven and earth, the glory of the sun and moon. Yin and Yang, the five elements, the cycle of heaven and earth. Great Qiankuan sword. She shouted and waved her swords with both hands, releasing the most powerful divine power. A five-colored greatsword spanning 100 miles across the sky suddenly descended from the heavens, slashing straight at Yin Shuyan and Dubhe. Chapter 2745. Boom! Kaboom! Kaboom! A series of earth-shattering explosions were heard in the Arch Palace. The sky's sundering spear shadow that was 100 miles long was shattered by the giant icy blue palms. But then, the giant icy blue palms were shattered into pieces by the grand Qiankuan sword. Yin Yao and Ji Ku worked together to neutralize Yin Shuyan's attack. The destructive shockwave sent the two of them and Yin Shuyan flying. Tianshu was injured again. His organs were shattered and blood gushed out of his mouth and nose. He retreated 100 miles away. Yin Shuyan wasn't injured, but she looked at Yin Yao in shock. Her eyes were flashing coldly. She only knew that Ji Ku was powerful and had reached the half-step heavenly god realm. She had also mastered 5 rare divine flames and was qualified to fight with her. She never thought that Yin Yao, who looked gentle like water and beautiful like a fairy, would actually have such a powerful strength. Not only that, but she also sensed a kind of ancient, vicissitude, divine might from Yin Yao's divine power. It made her heart palpitate, and she felt a little scared. There was no doubt that the two women in black armor in front of her were peerless overlords who could exchange thousands of blows with her. Yin Shuyan felt even more depressed. She could only blame Tianshu for asking for trouble. But the battle had already begun. How could she retreat? Otherwise, she would disappoint the tens of thousands of soldiers in the Arch Palace and lose their morale. "You're indeed quite capable," Yin Shuyan yelled. She didn't have time to check on Tianshu's injuries. She waved her palms again and used her ultimate divine power. 8 Barren Nirvana Palm. Yin Shuyan's palms flashed with dazzling golden divine light and unleashed a mysterious and vast power. Suddenly, 24 giant palms appeared in the sky and slashed at Ji Ku and Yin Yao like axes. The two women already knew that Yin Shuyan had an extraordinary background and was even stronger than Great Emperor Tian Fa. They didn't dare to let their guard down. They waved their swords and spears and faced the attack seriously. Tianshu also used a secret technique to deal with the internal injuries before charging over again. This time, not only did he wield the Neptune's halberd to attack Ji Ku, but he also summoned 9 dazzling divine swords to attack Ji Ku from all directions. The 9 swords were supreme-grade, true god weapons forged by Great Emperor Tian Fa and Yin Shuyan. They were specially made to complement his 7-star brilliant sun divine body. Tianshu controlled the sword with his mind and performed a marvelous sword technique. The 9 divine swords danced back and forth like shooting stars streaking across the sky, their power boundless. Boom! Boom boom! Bang 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 bang! The 4 peerless powerhouses fought fiercely in the sky. They used all their strength and used their most powerful skills. The colorful divine light and the sword light collided fiercely in the sky, creating a deafening boom. The destructive shockwave spread out in all directions with billions of shards of divine light, engulfing the entire Emperor God Palace. The soldiers around were too weak, and they weren't even qualified to watch the battle. When the shockwave of the battle spread, everyone ran away in a hurry. However, most of them weren't spared. They were swept away by the shockwave of the battle and turned into ashes. The Emperor God Palace, which was a few hundred miles wide, was also covered by the shockwave. Countless palaces and houses collapsed and turned into ruins. The battle between the four peerless overlords was a disaster for the Emperor God Palace. 15 minutes later, the battle between the four overlords paused for a moment. Tian Shu was severely injured again. His body was covered in purple blood and holes. It was a tragic sight. Yun Shuyan's hair was messy and her face was pale. She was breathing heavily. Of course, she was only a little bit flustered. She wasn't really hurt. Ji Ku and Yun Yao were protected by the energy stone armors, so they were safe. However, they had used too much of their divine power, so they had to end the battle quickly. If the battle dragged on, their divine power wasn't as strong as Yin Shuyan's, and they would definitely lose. Fortunately, the huge Emperor God Palace had been destroyed. Hundreds of palaces and houses had been turned into ruins. Only a few hundred miles of broken walls and rubble were left in the white sea of clouds. There had been more than 100 priests, more than 20,000 guards, and more than 100,000 soldiers in the palace. But now all the guards and priests had been killed. More than 100,000 soldiers had also been killed by Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and the four divine beasts. There were only about 2,000 survivors. They had long fled the Emperor God Palace when they saw the situation wasn't good. Bai Long, Ji Wushuang, and the others didn't waste time chasing after them. After completing their respective tasks, they gathered above the ruins and joined the battle. At first, Yin Shuiyin was protecting Tian Shu. She had the upper hand against Yun Yao and Ji Ku. But as Bai Long, Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan, and the four divine beasts joined the battle, the situation of the mother and son changed immediately. The two of them were besieged. They were in a dangerous situation where they could be seriously injured or even killed at any time. No matter how powerful Yin Shuiyin was, she couldn't withstand the combined attack of 5 peak true gods and 4 divine beasts. As for Tian Shu, there was no need to even mention him. The battle had only gone on for 100 seconds, but dozens of wounds had already appeared on his body. His entire left leg had been cut off. If the battle continued for another 15 minutes, he would be cut into pieces and blasted into pieces. It didn't matter how strong his physique was or how freakish his recovery ability was. Yun Shuiyin couldn't even take care of herself. It was very difficult for her to protect him. It was only then that Tian Shu woke up from his dream. He finally understood why Yin Shuiyin had let Yun Yao and Ji Ku go. Only then did he realize what a stupid thing he had done. He was courting death. In the sky above a continent east of planet Heaven Trader, the battle between Ji Tianxing and the Divine King's clone was still ongoing. Both sides had been chasing and fighting for half a day. Ji Tianxing fought as he fled. He had finally escaped a few 100 million miles and arrived at the easternmost continent of planet Heaven Trader. Unfortunately, he was entangled by the Divine King's clone and had no chance of escaping. In the process of fighting and escaping, he had suffered countless injuries. Perhaps it was 3,000 times? Or 8,000 times? He couldn't remember clearly. He only knew that every part of his body had been shattered by the Divine King's clone. Even his head was no exception. However, he had used the life-saving light of the heaven-mending pearl every time to quickly heal his injuries. That was how he had survived until now. His divine power had been severely depleted, and his strength had long weakened by 40%. Things had come to this point. Ji Tianxing knew that no matter how weak the Divine King's clone was, he still had the strength of a divine lord. No matter how monstrous he was, he only had the combat strength of a 5th-level celestial god. The two were not on the same level at all. Even if they fought for a few more days and nights, the outcome would not change at all. He would definitely lose. He could only think of a way to escape. As long as he could escape planet Heaven Trader, he could shake off the Divine King's clone. Thinking of this, he could only take a palm strike from the Divine King's clone and retreat 150 miles. He decisively summoned the Heavenly Star Shuttle. I hope the heavens will open their eyes and stop joking with me. Ji Tianxing muttered in his heart. Without hesitation, he circulated his divine power and injected it into the Heavenly Star Shuttle. Chapter 2746. Swoosh. Divine power surged into the heavenly star shuttle, causing it to emit a dazzling white light. A powerful spatial ripple spread out in all directions. Ji Tianxing could clearly sense that the mysterious power released by the heavenly star shuttle had formed a connection with a certain star in the void. That star was very far away from the Heaven Punisher planet. It was at least a few 100 million miles away. Ji Tianxing was overjoyed. He saw hope in escaping. However, before the heavenly star shuttle could take him away from the Heaven Punisher planet, the godly king's clone sneered. "Ha! You used this heavenly god artifact to escape from the void back to the Heaven Punisher planet?" The godly king's clone's eyes were sharp. He immediately saw through the heavenly star shuttle's grade and effect. Of course, he did not care about a divine artifact of this grade. "If I let you escape, I won't be able to wash away this humiliation even if I kill myself." The godly king's clone sneered. He suddenly unleashed his most violent divine power and used his ultimate divine ability. "Freeze! Explode!" He shouted coldly. He suddenly raised his palms as if he was going to embrace the sky. An invisible, overwhelming aura immediately loomed over the area within 50,000 li. At the same time, the endless white light from the heavenly star shuttle swallowed Ji Tianxing's body. He was about to disappear from the sky. However, the heaven and earth and space within 50,000 miles instantly froze. It was as if this area was frozen. Even the flow of time slowed down by 100 times. In other words, the speed at which the heavenly star shuttle carried Ji Tianxing away from the Heaven Punisher planet was slowed down by 100 times. From an instant, it became 5 breaths time. For the godly king's clone, 5 breaths time was enough for him to do many things. Damn it, he can control time. Ji Tianxing's heart was filled with shock. His eyes suddenly widened as he exclaimed in his heart. Time was one of the most mysterious powers in the world. Even a godly king might not be able to control it. Among the 3,000 great Daos, the mysteries and power of time were second only to destiny. Even the god of swords back then had only taken half a step and barely grasped time acceleration. What was more difficult than time acceleration was time stopping, and the most difficult was time deceleration. As for time reversal, that was a supreme power that even the most elite god kings were unable to grasp. Just as Ji Tianxing was filled with shock, the god king's avatar slowly brought his palms together. The heaven and earth and space within a radius of 50,000 kilometers also collapsed. It exploded in an instant. Boom! Within 50,000 miles, the sky collapsed, the earth shattered, and the space collapsed and folded. This region was directly destroyed by the God King's avatar, turning into a pitch-black void. The mountains, rivers, sky, earth, and spiritual energy all disappeared without a trace. Boom! The heavenly star shuttle disintegrated into billions of pieces that scattered in the void like quicksand. The dazzling white light that enveloped Ji Tianxing also became fragmented. Then, something even more terrifying happened. Ji Tianxing's 1,000-meter-tall body also cracked like a piece of ice. Kacha, kacha! A crisp-shattering sound was heard. He saw with his own eyes that his god body was gradually shattered as the cracks extended. After 5 breaths of time, the God King's avatar's divine power dissipated. This void started to gradually heal, repaired by heavenly Tao laws. But Ji Tianxing had already become minced meat all over the ground, as many as 500 pieces. Golden divine blood seeped out of the fragments, scattering into the sky. If it were other true gods being smashed into pieces all over the ground, they would have long breathed their last. But Ji Tianxing did not die. His divine soul still existed. Under the protection of the heaven-mending pearl, he still maintained consciousness. He was unresigned and actually used his mind to control those 500 over pieces of minced meat, slowly gathering them together, still wanting to reconstruct his body. This scene was incomparably strange. The God King's avatar was not surprised either. He looked at those minced meat pieces with a smile and said in an icy tone, Ji Tianxing, this emperor actually remembered your name. This is your honor. However, in front of absolute powerful strength, no matter how monstrous you are, there's only a path to death. You've used up all of your means, right? Before you die, this emperor will ask you one last question. Ji Tianxing did not answer and was still working hard to piece his body together. Even if his physical body was destroyed, he never despaired or gave up. He suddenly thought a question. Previously, the God King's avatar fought with him for so long and did not use all of his strength. It had a feeling of a cat playing with a mouse. It seemed like the God King's avatar wanted to see just how many trump cards he had. And just now, when the God King's avatar executed the space, freezing explosion divine ability, he clearly used all of his strength. After destroying his physical body, the God King's avatar was not in a hurry to kill him. Instead, he wanted to ask him a question. Could it be that the God King's avatar was stalling for time? No. Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to observe and discover that the God King's avatar's golden light had clearly become much fainter. This meant that the God King's avatar's power consumption was too great, and his strength was starting to weaken. Ji Tianxing immediately thought, that's right, this God King's avatar only has 1% of the main body strength. When he moves in the mortal world, not only will he be suppressed by heavenly Tao, his divine power can't be replenished either. He can't stay here for a long time. Once his divine power is exhausted, he will dissipate. As long as I don't die and continue to waste time with him, I will have a chance to escape. Thinking of this, hope rose in Ji Tianxing's heart. At this time, the God King's avatar put away his sneer and said in an icy tone, Ji Tianxing, I have seen through your disguise. You are not a true dragon human. You have only mastered the divine abilities of the dragon race. You are so monstrous, and you are proficient in many divine abilities and secret techniques that only the upper realm has. You are definitely not an ant of the mortal world. Which expert are you the reincarnation of? The God King's avatar had his hands behind his back. His 3 eyes were shining brightly as he stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his answer. However, Ji Tianxing remained silent. Only more than 500 pieces of minced meat were slowly pieced together, making a slight rustling sound. The God King's avatar was confident of victory and did not stop him. He waited patiently. After about 10 breaths of time, more than 500 pieces of minced meat were pieced together, forming a giant of golden light that was 10,000 feet tall and covered in cracks. Ji Tianxing hurriedly absorbed the life-saving divine light from the heaven-mending pearl and enveloped himself. Swoosh! The dense white light flowed slowly and only dissipated after a few breaths of time. Ji Tianxing's shattered body was completely healed, and not a single crack could be seen on his body. He stared coldly at the God King's avatar and said in a deep voice, I don't understand what you are saying. Ha ha! You are stubborn. The God King's avatar sneered disdainfully and said in a sinister tone, but you should understand that as long as I want to know, no one can hide it. You no longer have any chance. I will capture your divine soul and strip your divine soul of its memories. At that time, all the answers will be revealed. As he said that, the God King's avatar raised his palms again and unleashed his strongest power, using an ultimate divine ability. Destroy. Chapter 2747. The Divine King clone shouted coldly. Just one word exploded in the sky like thunder. In the next instant, the surrounding sky that had just healed directly turned into a void. A surge of dark supreme divine power enveloped a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Under the terrifying divine power, Ji Tianxing did not have the chance to dodge at all and was directly suppressed. Swoosh! His 10,000 feet tall body was actually like a weathered rock, mottled with age. Immediately after, his body collapsed with a bang, turning into a billion grains of sand and dust, scattering in the darkness. The divine body that he had just condensed and repaired actually directly weathered away, turning into countless dust. Not even a piece of complete flesh and bone, not a drop of golden divine blood was left. What kind of terrifying method was this? However, after the divine king clone executed this divine ability, the golden light all over his body dissipated by more than half. His body became even thinner. His strength also weakened rapidly, only having 60% of his strength left. Swoosh! A large cloud of sand and dust scattered in the darkness and disappeared very quickly. In the darkness, only a walnut-sized light bead was left, releasing a dense divine light. Just as the divine king clone said, he destroyed Ji Tianxing's physical body, leaving only the divine soul behind. But Ji Tianxing's divine soul had long fused together with the heaven-mending bead. The divine king clone was just about to execute a capturing technique to capture Ji Tianxing's divine soul. Suddenly seeing that dense white bead clearly, his body immediately trembled, both eyes revealing a look of surprise. This divine bead is actually a divine king-level treasure? No wonder. No wonder this boy has such heaven-defying talent and even grasps so many top-notch divine abilities. Obtaining a king-level divine artifact in the mortal world, what kind of heaven-defying lucky chance is this? The divine king clone sensed the aura of a king-level divine artifact from the heaven-mending bead and immediately came to a realization. He immediately fired out a giant palm of golden light, grabbing towards the heaven-mending bead. However, the heaven-mending bead emitted a dazzling white light, turning into 3 sword blades, slashing towards the divine king clone. Clearly, Ji Tianxing's divine soul was still there, not dead, nor unconscious. He manipulated the heaven-mending bead with his divine soul, releasing a vast divine power to deal with the divine king clone. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The blazing white sword pierced through the air, aiming straight for the divine king's clone's vital point. However, the divine king's clone remained fearless as he sneered. Ha ha! It's just a king gray divine artifact that has exhausted all of its power. What can it do to me? That was right. The heaven-mending pearl was once a king gray divine artifact, but its power had long been exhausted. After Ji Tianxing had obtained it, he had helped it absorb all kinds of energy over the years, which allowed it to regain its luster. However, its power was still less than 10% of a king gray god artifact's. At the same time as he sneered, the divine king's avatar brazenly waved both of his palms, exploding with extreme power as he ruthlessly hacked at the heaven-mending pearl. Heaven-shattering. His huge palms emitted a dazzling red light, as if they were giant axes that could split the heavens. They instantly shattered the 3 blazing white sword blades. Immediately after, the crimson palms, which were as large as mountains, fiercely struck the heaven-mending pearl. Boom! Following a muffled explosion, the heaven-mending bead shone with a brilliant white light and was sent flying thousands of miles away. After the white light that soared into the sky was extinguished, the heaven-mending orb became dim. It was obvious that it had been severely injured. Although it did not shatter on the spot, there were no cracks. However, more than half of its power had been used up, and it became dim again. Ji Tianxing's soul, which was inside the heaven-mending orb, also suffered an unprecedented injury and fell into a coma. This emperor wants to see what this divine orb is. The divine king's avatar's figure became even fainter, and his power became even weaker. However, he was still able to kill Ji Tianxing several times. His figure flashed across thousands of miles of darkness and appeared in front of the heaven-mending orb. Just as he was about to reach out and grab the heaven-mending orb, an unbelievable scene appeared. Swoosh! The heaven-mending orb emitted a dazzling white light, and it instantly disappeared into the darkness. The divine king's avatar's huge palm grabbed empty air, and he unwillingly withdrew it. Damn it! In the end, he still escaped. As expected of a king gray divine artifact, it actually has a consciousness to protect its owner. The divine king's avatar was filled with anger, and he gritted his teeth hatefully. He used his divine perception to search a radius of 60 million miles, but he did not find Ji Tianxing and the heaven-mending orb. Only then did he turn around and leave. After all, the heaven-mending orb had disappeared into thin air. It had already left planet Heaven Trader, and its whereabouts were unknown. The Divine King's avatar did not know where to look for it. He lowered his head and glanced at his dimming golden body, which was getting thinner and thinner. He hurriedly flew in the direction of the Arch Palace. This emperor doesn't have much time left. I have to deal with all the future troubles. He muttered in a low voice, and with a single step, he crossed thousands of miles and headed straight for the Endless Sea Realm. At the same time, in the sea of clouds where the Arch Palace was located, the battle was still ongoing. The once magnificent Arch Palace had long been reduced to hundreds of miles of ruins. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and experts had also been killed by Yun Yao and the others. At this moment, only Yun Shuiyin, her son, and Yun Yao were high up in the sky. 5 true god experts and 4 divine beasts were attacking Yun Shuiyin and her son with all their might, and they had completely gained the upper hand. The two sides had already exchanged tens of thousands of blows. The world-destroying battle caused hundreds of thousands of miles of land to sink and the sky to collapse. Yin Yao and the others were not injured. Only the 4 divine beasts, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang, had suffered minor injuries. Tian Shu had long been severely injured and was on the verge of death. His limbs had been cut off, and he looked like a stick covered in purple blood. His divine soul was also severely injured, and he was in a dazed, dizzy, and blurry state. If Yin Shuiyin had not been protecting him, he would have been hacked to death and torn to pieces. Yin Shuiyin's strength had already reached 30 times that of a peak true god. However, she had been besieged for so long, and she had to divert her attention to protect Tian Shu. She had long been severely injured. She was no longer as graceful and elegant as before. Her long hair was messy, and her clothes were ragged. Her entire body was covered in icy blue blood and wounds. Dozens of wounds were so deep that her bones could be seen. She had also used up more than half of her divine power, and her combat strength was constantly weakening. She had no choice but to take the severely injured Tian Shu with her and flee into the distance while fighting. She was anxious, angry, and humiliated. She was the reincarnation of a divine lord, an expert who wanted to break through to the divine king realm. When had she fallen to such a miserable state? However, the current situation left her in despair. She could not see a chance to escape. She could only pray in her heart that the divine king's clone would quickly finish off Ji Tianxing and return to save her and her son. Perhaps her prayers were finally effective. Just as her injuries were worsening and her strength was weakening, a golden light lit up in the distant sky. The sacred golden light was filled with supreme divine power, illuminating the world. Yin Shuiyin thought she was seeing things or was hallucinating. However, in the next moment, a golden figure that was thousands of miles tall appeared high in the sky. Swoosh! The figure that was thousands of miles tall had 3 eyes and 6 divine wings. Its entire body exuded a divine power that could subdue the world. I'm not seeing things. The divine king has indeed returned. There's finally hope for us. When Yin Shuiyin saw the figure clearly, she was so excited that her blood surged. She revealed an expression of relief. Chapter 2748. Of course, Tian Shu also saw the godly king's clone. Unfortunately, his injuries were too severe, and he was like a pile of mush. No matter how surprised he was, he could not shout. Yin Shuiyin and her son also noticed the godly king's clone. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others also saw the godly king's clone. Everyone and the 4 godly beasts were stunned for a moment. Then, they looked extremely worried and anxious. Is that the backer of the Heaven Punisher, the godly king from the upper realm? Although it's just a godly king's clone, his divine power is so powerful. There was no news of Big Brother Tianxing before. He must have been hunted down by the godly king's clone. Now that the godly king's clone has appeared, doesn't that mean Big Brother Tianxing? Impossible. Master is invincible. He won't die. Everyone thought of the most important problem, and their expressions changed. The worry and anxiety in their hearts were about to explode. At this moment, the godly king's clone looked down at Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the four godly beasts. Two half-step heavenly gods and three peak true gods, and a black dragon, a heavenly fox, a glazed fire dragon. That big fish could be a coin? The godly king's clone was very sharp. He instantly saw through everyone's strength and the identities of the four godly beasts. Even though he was extremely powerful and could control thousands of gods, he could not help but twitch his mouth. His eyes were filled with shock. There are actually so many powerhouses and such rare divine beasts in this ant-like mortal world. Moreover, those ants and the four godly beasts are Ji Tianqing's accomplices. The godly king's clone was also shocked. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were half-step heavenly gods, while Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang were peak true gods. There were definitely a bunch of them in the godly realm. To the godly king, they were all ants. He did not even have the interest to look at them. But don't forget, this is the mortal world. This godly king had spent many years and used many special methods to cultivate the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor and Tian Shu, a half-step heavenly god and a peak true god. Now, there were two half-step heavenly gods and three peak true gods among Ji Tianqing's accomplices. Most importantly, among the three peak true gods, there were two children. One was incomparably handsome, while the other was as delicate as carved jade. Both of them looked no more than 10 years old. This was too terrifying. Even in the god realm, geniuses with such extraordinary aptitudes could be counted on one's fingers. There are also the four godly beasts. Black dragons and glazed fire dragons were very common in the dragon world, so there was no need to mention them. Of course, the godly beast was godly king was godly god course. As for that fathead blue fish that looked a little silly, its origins were even more terrifying. The godly was godly was godly king god, godly as godly god. The godly king's clone stared at the godly king fervently. He suddenly wanted to raise a pet as a mount. He had even thought of a name, Big Fish. When Big Fish reached adulthood, he could ride it and roam the godly realm. That way, he would be able to intimidate billions of godly tribes. To put it bluntly, that would be even cooler. I want that godly king god. The godly king's clone narrowed his eyes as a greedy sneer appeared on his face. Then, he looked at Yun Yao, Ji Ku, the white dragon, and the others. Although Yun Yao and Ji Ku were very beautiful, they were as pure as ice and as pure as jade and as elegant as fairies. Unfortunately, the honorable godly king had seen tens of thousands of beautiful goddesses, saintesses, and top socialites. Moreover, he was not a human. In terms of aesthetics, he had a completely different concept from humans. Therefore, he was not interested in Yun Yao and Ji Ku's beauty. His gaze stopped on everyone's armor. The armor that was as black as ink looked ordinary. However, the godly king's clone could sense that the armor and weapons in their hands contained an invisible divine power. The divine power aura made him curious and eager. The material of the armor and weapons should be the boundless divine stone that Hao Ian mentioned, right? How interesting. I have to study it carefully. With that, the godly king's clone's target was set. He would spare the godly king god's life and bring it back to the godly realm. He would kill the others and the three divine beasts, take their weapons and armor, and bring them back for study. It was a perfect outcome. Therefore, the godly king's clone glanced at Yin Shuiyin, who was covered in blood, and said indifferently, "Yin Shuiyin, you may leave." "Yes, your majesty." Yin Shuiyin was overjoyed. She quickly bowed and left with the unconscious Tian Shu. The godly king's clone was going to take action personally. Then, all of this would end soon. Moreover, in the past few hundred years, she had only reported her name once when she participated in the grand sacrificial ceremony. The godly king remembered it. What did this mean? The godly king still paid attention to her. In fact, his attention and expectations for her were higher than those for the great Emperor Hao Yin. Yin Shuiyin thought to herself, don't talk about the fact that the great Emperor Hao Yin isn't extinct yet. Even if we are, I, Yin Shuiyin, will have the support of a supreme godly king when I ascend to the upper realm. My future path to godhood will be smooth sailing. At that moment, the godly king's clone looked at Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others. He said indifferently, other than that, Kuan, the rest of you can commit suicide. His tone was very casual, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. There was no false bravado, nor was there any pretense of authority. This was because there was no need for a paragon like him, who stood at the peak of the heavenly realm. However, even ants had lives, and they had the right to struggle for survival. Moreover, the ants in the sky were the most powerful ones among the trillions of ants. In our dictionary, there is only death in battle. There is no such thing as suicide. Yun Yao looked coldly at the godly king's clone as she spoke in a sonorous voice. Bastard, where is my big brother Tianqing? What did you do to him? Ji Ku's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He held the Origin Stone Divine Spear and stared at the godly king's clone. Bai Long licked his lips as his white hair danced in the wind. He sneered with a bloodthirsty expression. You are just a mere godly king's clone. How dare you be so arrogant? You have descended to the mortal realm and gone through so many battles. How much strength do you have left? I would like to see how much strength you have compared to your main body. The youngest Ji Wuhin and Ji Wushuang were also filled with grief and anger. They stared at the godly king's clone with bloodshot eyes. Bastard, give us back our father. Everyone's willpower was firm, and their resistance was resolute. Moreover, they did not fear the godly king's clone at all. This surprised the godly king's clone. He thought to himself, these ants seem to have known that I would send my clone. However, he thought about it from another perspective. This was not important. After all, it did not matter if those ants resisted or not. Chapter 2749. Of course, the strong often had some wicked interests that ordinary people didn't have. For example, when he was chasing after Ji Tianqing, he didn't immediately use a big move to kill Ji Tianqing. Instead, he acted like a cat toying with a mouse, forcing Ji Tianqing into a desperate situation and forcing him to use all his trump cards. During this process, the Divine King clone discovered many of Ji Tianqing's secrets. At the same time, he also enjoyed making Ji Tianqing die in the most desperate and helpless situation. It seemed like Ji Tianqing had only disappeared and wasn't completely dead. When he thought of this, the Divine King clone was somewhat unwilling. He felt a little uneasy and felt that there might be variables in the future. Therefore, another idea popped up in his mind. In order to make up for the unwillingness in his heart, and also to prevent future variables, his gaze fell on Ji Wuhin and Ji Wushuang. Just now, these two brats seemed to have said that Ji Tianqing is their father. Ha ha! Interesting. The Divine King clone stared deeply at Ji Tianqing and muttered to himself. As expected, he is 80% similar to Ji Tianqing. He is so serious and cold at such a young age. Even his aptitude and talent are so outstanding. It would be too much of a pity to kill such a perfect, unpolished gem. Why don't I bring him and Tian Shu back together and train them? They will definitely become this emperor's sharp blades in the future. Even if there are variables in the future and Ji Tianqing can go to the God realm to seek revenge. Just think about how the father and son would have to fight each other to the death when they meet. Just how pleasing would that be? When he thought of this, the Divine King clone's sneer became even more sinister. After making up his mind, he didn't waste any more words and raised his palms to attack. However, he didn't expect that Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were even faster and actually took the initiative to attack. Great Qiankuan's sword. Raging flames incinerate the heavens. Space-splitting dragon shadow sword. Endless stars sword. In that instant, everyone unleashed their strongest powers, unleashing their strongest killing moves to surround and attack the God King's clone. The gigantic sword that could split the heavens and earth, the five-color divine flames that surged and covered the sky, the white dragon phantom that traversed the horizon, and the gigantic sword that descended from the sky. There were also 4 divine beasts that attacked with all their might, releasing heaven-burning raging flames, icy light, and divine light shadows. Instantly, the area within a radius of 50,000 kilometers was illuminated by a dazzling divine light. Surging divine power filled the entire area. The entire area was in complete chaos. Hiding thousands of miles away, Yun Shuiyin couldn't be bothered to treat Tianshu's injuries. She hurriedly retreated thousands of miles away. Facing the attacks of the 5 experts and the 4 divine beasts, the God King's clone did not dodge. That would be too embarrassing, and there was no need to do so. The God King's clone frowned when he saw their divine arts and sensed the attributes of their divine power. A look of surprise flashed through his eyes. These ants and divine beasts seemed to have had some fortuitous encounters. Of course, the God King's clone could tell that Yun Yao was no ordinary person. She was like the embodiment of a world. Jiku was also extraordinary. He could control the Phoenix race's nirvana divine flame, and he probably had the ability to become immortal. The other 3 people and 4 divine beasts also had their own special abilities. Of course, they could only surprise the God King's clone. That was all. A bunch of ants. "You deserve to die," muttered the God King's clone indifferently. He raised his palms and slammed them down. Boom! Crack! Instantly, 2 gigantic crimson palms that blotted out the sky slammed into the divine light shadows that filled the sky. There was a loud explosion, and the light shadows that filled the sky collapsed and exploded. The white dragon phantom and the gigantic sword that traversed the horizon, the divine light shadows that were as large as mountains, the divine flames that blotted out the sky, they were all shattered by a single palm. In the face of absolute power, no matter how flashy a divine art was, it was useless. With a loud rumble, the divine art attacks of the 4 divine beasts and the divine beasts dissipated along with the 2 gigantic crimson palms. Everyone's attacks were easily neutralized by the God King's clone. However, the God King's clone only used 70% of his strength. He was unable to injure Yun Yao, Jiku, and the others. Such an outcome made Yun Shuiyin, who was thousands of miles away, frown. That's not right. With His Majesty's strength, he should be able to severely injure them in one move. Although Yun Shuiyin knew that the 5 experts and the 4 divine beasts would be able to beat her to a pulp if they joined forces, it would be a tragic sight. However, she stubbornly believed that the God King should be able to crush everything in his path. No matter how strong the opponent was, no matter how many there were, he should be able to crush them all. And the current situation clearly did not match the God King's clone's strength. She frowned and thought for a moment, revealing a look of worry. Could it be that the God King's clone had already expended most of his strength when he was fighting Ji Tianxing? At this moment, the God King's clone is already very weak? With this thought in mind, Yin Shuiyan's heart, which had just relaxed, could not help but tense up again. She had to be on guard. If the God King's clone was defeated, she would have to quickly leave planet Heaven Trader. At the same time, Yun Yao, Jiku, and the others had the same thoughts as Yin Shuiyin. Everyone's tense expressions relaxed a little. White Dragon pointed his sword at the God King's clone and mocked contemptuously. "What bullsh asterisk T God King? Is this all you've got? Just now, you acted like you were the boss of the world, but in the end, you're just an idiot?" The God King's clone was enraged. He was the supreme God King who ruled over thousands of gods. When had he ever been scolded by an ant? This was absolutely intolerable. This emperor has underestimated you ants. But do you think that you have the right to fight me? Naive. The God King's clone shouted coldly. He stopped underestimating them and used his full strength. Sky collapsing fist. The God King's clone suddenly extended his left palm and blasted out a golden fist shadow that was as large as a mountain. The fist shadow descended from the sky, carrying with it endless divine might as it enveloped the glazed fire dragon. Before the fist shadow arrived, it was suppressed by the supreme divine might. The space around it froze, making it unable to dodge. Without a doubt, the God King's clone had changed his strategy. He was going to kill everyone one by one. The first target to be killed was the inconspicuous glazed fire dragon. At this critical moment, the glazed fire dragon could only resist with all its might. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others also saw through the God King's clone's intention. They let out a cry of surprise and combined their powers to resist. Suddenly, countless sword shadows lit up and slashed toward the sky, collapsing fist shadow. Bam! 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 Following a series of deafening explosions, the divine spells that everyone used were all destroyed. Fragments of divine light burst out and covered the sky. This time, the God King's clone used his strongest power and used a killer move. Its power had indeed increased by 3 times. Bam! There was a loud, muffled explosion. The sky-collapsing fist shadow struck the glazed fire dragon. It immediately let out a miserable cry. The mountain-like golden dragon body was smashed into pieces by the sky, collapsing fist shadow. Billions of pieces of flesh and blood splattered and scattered between heaven and earth. Not only was the glazed fire dragon's physical body destroyed, but its dragon soul was also instantly killed by the punch. It died on the spot. Chapter 2750. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had witnessed the glazed fire dragon being killed with a single punch. The shock and anger in their hearts erupted like a volcano. No one had expected the godly king's clone to have such terrifying divine might when he went all out. He's still the divine king's clone after all. Ji Ku was filled with grief and anger as he looked at the glazed fire dragon's body parts scattered all over the place. That short sentence contained too much helplessness and pessimism. The most sorrowful person was Yin Yao. The glazed fire dragon had been with her for countless years, accompanying her in her cultivation. She had long developed feelings for it. But now, the glazed fire dragon had been killed by the divine king's clone right under her nose. Filled with anger, she really wanted to kill the divine king's clone with her sword. But reason calmed her down. Although the divine king's clone has weakened a little, he can still kill us one by one. Even if we attack him as a group and exhaust his divine power, we will all be dead by then. We can't be entangled with him anymore. Let's leave this place first, find Tianxing, and come up with a countermeasure. Yin Yao used her divine consciousness to convey her thoughts to everyone. Ji Ku and the white dragon smiled bitterly and shook their heads. Escape? Can we escape? The divine king's clone is 100 times faster than us. There's no way we can escape. Just as everyone was discussing telepathically, the divine king's clone attacked again. This time, his target was the black dragon. I hate the reptiles of the dragon clan the most. The divine king's clone had a cold look in his eyes as he shouted coldly. Sky-splitting palm. He stretched out his palms again and unleashed his strongest power, creating 2 golden palm shadows that were thousands of miles long. The dazzling golden sky-splitting palm shadows struck down with unparalleled divine power, locking onto the black dragon's aura. The space within thousands of miles around, it was also frozen by an invisible force. At this critical moment, the black dragon used his ultimate skill without hesitation and coiled his body together. Black Tortoise Dragon Coil. This was the black tortoise's ultimate defensive skill that Ji Tianxing had taught him. The black dragon's 100-kilometer-long body coiled up, emitting a boundless black light that protected its head. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and the others immediately used their ultimate techniques to block the 2 palms. However, it was all in vain. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst a series of explosions, everyone's divine spells were all destroyed by the sky-splitting palm. The power of the 2 palm shadows did not diminish as they struck the black dragon. PFFF, the hundreds of kilometers of black light enveloping the black dragon was instantly shattered by the heaven-splitting palm. Its all-out defense couldn't even withstand a single blow. Immediately afterward, 2 heaven-splitting palm shadows struck it. Boom! With a muffled sound, the black dragon's body was shattered by the sky-splitting palm. It was broken into a dozen pieces and fell from the sky. The huge dragon head was also smashed into pieces by the giant palm. Dragon blood and brain matter splattered all over the sky. Not only was the dragon's body destroyed, but the dragon's soul was also shattered by the heaven-splitting palm. The black dragon didn't even have time to scream before it died. More than a dozen pieces of the dragon's body and the smashed dragon's head fell into the ruins below, mixed with dragon blood. The glazed fire dragon and the black dragon were killed one after another. Everyone's defense was useless. Even Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others took the opportunity to attack the Divine King's avatar. However, it was to no avail. The 10,000-kilometer-tall golden avatar didn't have any wounds or holes. The only change was that the light around his body dimmed even more, and his body became thinner. Everyone knew that the Divine King's avatar's power was weakening. However, they didn't dare to take the risk and couldn't continue fighting. They believed that before the Divine King's avatar's power dissipated, he could kill them all. Yin Yao immediately gave the order. Run! Where there's life, there's hope. The Divine King's avatar couldn't descend every day, and he wouldn't stay on planet Heaven forever. As long as they could escape today's calamity, they would have plenty of opportunities to deal with the Heaven Punishers in the future. Swoosh! Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others took Qian Yu and Lan Kuan and ran away without hesitation. Everyone used their teleportation divine abilities and teleported 5 times in the blink of an eye, escaping 5,000 miles away. The Divine King's avatar chased after them at a moderate pace. He sneered disdainfully and said, "You still want to run away? Even Ji Tianxing couldn't escape from me. You're too naive." As he spoke, he crossed 10,000 miles in one step and stood in front of Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others. When everyone heard what he said, they were instantly worried and furious. "Bastard! What did you do to Tianxing? Bastard! Where's Big Brother Tianxing?" The Divine King's avatar looked down at everyone and sneered mockingly. "Where else can he be? He's been waiting for you at the underworld. Since you love each other so much, I'll send you on your way. You'll have company on your way to the underworld." As he spoke, he used his ultimate divine ability again and attacked Qian Yu. Sky-shattering finger. The Divine King's avatar stretched out his right hand and pointed at Qian Yu with his index and middle fingers. Suddenly, a 1,000-mile long golden finger descended from the sky and pierced toward Qian Yu. Heaven and earth within 10,000 miles froze. Qian Yu's divine soul was also suppressed, and his aura was locked. There was nowhere for him to run. Yin Yao, Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, and Lan Kuan all used their ultimate techniques to block the sky-shattering finger descending from the sky. However, everyone's divine abilities and secret techniques were once again crushed by the sky-shattering finger. Bam! Following an earth-shattering explosion, Qian Yu's mountain-like body was also crushed by the sky-shattering finger. Thousands of pieces of ice-blue flesh and blood fell from the sky. With just one move, Qian Yu's physical body and divine soul collapsed at the same time. Not only that, Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang were also sent flying by the violent shockwave. When everyone tried to block it, Ji Ku didn't do anything. She already knew the outcome. No one could block it, and Qian Yu's body would also explode. Therefore, she could only suppress her endless grief and anger and secretly use the divine ability secret manual. Swish! Divine flames burst out of her body, and she was as dazzling as the sun. 4 different color divine flames formed a projection of a divine pagoda that was thousands of feet tall and enveloped her body. At this moment, she was already connected to the Jiuqian Tenju Tower a few 100 million miles away. She was equivalent to a portal. As long as everyone entered the tower, they would be able to return to the tower in the 5 Elements world a few 100 million miles away. "Quick, let's go." Ji Ku stood in the sky and shouted with her immortal will, telling everyone to run away first. However, Yin Yao, Bai Long, Lan Kuan, and the 2 children were a few thousand miles away from her. Everyone came back to their senses and immediately teleported towards her. Unfortunately, the Divine King's avatar had been watching Ji Ku for a long time and saw something strange about her. "You're just an ant. How can you do that?" However, it's all in vain. The divine king's avatar sneered in disdain and suddenly stretched out his arms, as if he wanted to hug the sky. Apparently, he used that ultimate divine power again. Sky freezing explode. Chapter 2751. It consumed too much divine power to use this divine power. The godly king's avatar's body became even dimmer and thinner. However, the power of this divine power was incomparably terrifying. A mysterious and vast divine power instantly enveloped a radius of tens of thousands of miles. This area was frozen by an invisible divine power. Not only did space freeze, but even the flow of time slowed down by 100 times. Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the others ran toward Jiku with all their might, but their speed was slowed down countless times. At the same time, under the precise control of the godly king's avatar, the space in this area exploded. Boom! Crack! An earth-shattering sound rang out. The world within a radius of tens of thousands of miles became fragmented, like a smashed mirror. Yun Shuiyin and Tian Shu, who were hiding tens of thousands of miles away, were fine. Lan Kuan and Ji Wuhan, who were desperately teleporting, were also fine. But Ji Wushuang's body directly collapsed, turning into several hundred pieces of debris. Bai Long was also shattered into countless pieces of flesh and blood. Yin Yao's outcome was slightly better. Dense cracks appeared all over her body, but her divine body did not shatter. Dazzling rainbow divine light surged out of her body, protecting her body and divine soul. The one who suffered the most was, of course, Ji Ku. She was the target of the godly king's avatar. Not only did the source stone armor she wore crack, but her divine body also shattered into thousands of pieces. The divine pagoda, formed by the 4 divine flames, naturally dissipated. However, she was not dead yet. Her divine soul was still intact. She endured the pain of being cut into pieces and used her divine soul to control thousands of pieces of flesh and bones to gather together. However, the godly king's avatar did not give her a chance to recover her divine body. Boom! A mountain-sized golden fist descended from the sky and blasted Ji Ku into smithereens. Not only did thousands of pieces of flesh and blood dissipate, but even her divine soul was shattered. However, a strange scene occurred. The pieces of flesh and soul that were falling from the sky were actually ignited with dazzling golden divine flames. Nirvana divine flames. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the Nirvana divine flame burned everything and disappeared from the sky. In this way, only Yun Yao, Ji Wuhan, Lan Kuan, and the shattered white dragon remained in the sky. The white dragon was incomparably stubborn. Hundreds of pieces of flesh blossomed with white light and quickly gathered together in an attempt to restore its divine body. However, the God King's clone didn't give him the chance. Boom! A gigantic blood-red palm that blotted out the sky slammed down. Immediately, the heavens collapsed and the earth cracked. The sun and moon lost their light. White Dragon's divine soul shattered on the spot, and his physical body turned into fine powder that filled the sky, falling into the ruins. Thus, the White Dragon also died. The God King's clone's gaze landed on Yun Yao, seeing her body emitting a 7-colored brilliance, as if there was a special power protecting her. A hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. However, he didn't think too deeply about it. He waved his hand and grabbed at Ji Wuhan and Lan Kuan. Lan Kuan saw Bai Long being killed with his own eyes. He was filled with grief and indignation. His eyes turned red. Without waiting for the God King's clone's gigantic palm to grab him, he resolutely self-destructed. He was honest and straightforward by nature. After interacting with everyone for so many years, he had already planted a deep friendship. Now that the White Dragon was dead, and everyone was dead, he didn't want to live alone. Boom! A ball of dazzling blue light suddenly exploded high in the sky, like a huge mushroom cloud rising into the sky. In that instant, the area within a radius of 50,000 miles became an icy blue world. The God King's clone also didn't expect that the seemingly honest Lan Kuan was actually so unyielding. He was the closest to Lan Kuan, so he bore the brunt of the most violent power. Boom! Under the icy blue shock wave, he was actually blasted hundreds of miles away, his body swaying. Although he wasn't injured, and he didn't look like he was in a sorry state. However, his figure became even fainter, close to being transparent. When the shock wave of Lan Kuan's self-destruction swept across a radius of 50,000 miles, there were other people who suffered as well. Ji Wuhan was already injured, and after being hit by the shock wave, he fainted on the spot, his body covered in cracks. Like broken porcelain, he would shatter at the slightest touch. Yin Yao's body was already covered in cracks. It was only because she was protected by the seven-color divine light that she didn't collapse on the spot. After being swept by the shock wave, her body couldn't be maintained and immediately turned into thousands of pieces, scattering between heaven and earth. Even her divine soul was severely injured, and she fell into a coma. Yin Shuiyin, who was thousands of miles away, didn't have time to escape either. She was drowned by the shock wave of Lan Kuan's self-destruction. Boom! She was blasted away, tumbling and falling thousands of miles away. Uffed! When she stopped in the sky, blood spurted out of her 7 orifices and cracks appeared all over her body, turning into icy blue bloodlines. Her body was also about to collapse, and her strength was extremely weak. Even Tian Shu, who was protected in her arms, was severely injured in his coma. Tian Shu was originally a pile of meat paste, and now it was directly turned into a pile of meat paste, miserable to the extreme. His divine soul was also severely injured, and he fell into a deep hibernation. Only a weak trace of divine soul aura remained, proving that he was still alive. After a long time, when the overwhelming icy blue shock wave spread to 500,000 miles, it gradually dissipated. This area was completely destroyed into ruins, and chaos reigned. The extremely tragic battle of the gods had ended just like that. The Heaven Destroyer star was saved. Ji Tianxing and his companions had all died tragically. Only Ji Wuhan was still alive, but he had fallen into the hands of the God King's clone. The Divine King's clone stood in the primal chaos sky in a daze as he looked around. Other than him and the unconscious Ji Wuhan, there was no one else. He lowered his head to look at his almost transparent body and couldn't help but frown. Damn it, I only have 30% of my divine power left. He frowned and thought for a moment, then turned his head to look at Yun Shuiyin in the distance. Then, he carried the unconscious Ji Wuhan in his hand and flew toward Yun Shuiyin. Swoosh! After a few steps, the God King's clone landed in front of Yun Shuiyin and looked down at her indifferently. Even though the Heaven Destroyer race had won the final victory, Yun Shuiyin was not happy. She wasn't happy at all. Her injuries were too severe, so much so that they threatened her foundation of the divine path. She might not be able to break through to the God King realm in the future. Her most valued son, Tian Shu, was also in a state of uncertain survival. She was very anxious and sorrowful. Only when the God King's clone arrived did she see a life-saving straw. She hurriedly endured her injuries and knelt down. "Greetings, Your Majesty. I beg Your Majesty to save my son." As she kowtowed, Yin Shuiyin begged with a heart full of grief. The God King's clone looked at her expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, "Tian Shu is my last disciple, so I will naturally save him. Moreover, he is already injured to such an extent that it is unsuitable for him to remain in the mortal realm. However, I will be taking him back to the God realm, which is an act of defiance against the will of the heavens. You will have to pay the price." Yun Shuiyin ignored the last sentence. When she heard that Tian Shu could still be saved and would be brought back to the God realm by the God King's clone, she revealed a relieved expression and hurriedly kowtowed in thanks. "Yin Shuiyin will never forget Your Majesty's grace of rebirth." The God King's clone shook his head expressionlessly. "There's no need to never forget. You just need to make a contribution." Chapter 2752. Yin Shuiyin was stunned. She subconsciously raised her head and looked at the godly king's clone in confusion. Your Majesty, how can I contribute? At this moment, many thoughts flashed through her mind. Could it be that Your Majesty wants me? No, no matter how beautiful I am, I'm covered in blood, and I'm severely injured. Furthermore, His Majesty is not a vulgar person. Most importantly, this is only his clone, not his true body. The godly king's clone saw her constantly changing expression and guessed that she was imagining things. However, he did not expose her. Instead, he pointed to the sky. I forcefully opened the passage between the two worlds and have been suppressed by the heavenly Tao. My strength has weakened. Now that the passage is healing, I need your help if my clone wants to bring them back. You should know the divine realm's blood-burning technique, right? Upon hearing this, Yin Shuiyin roughly understood what he meant. Her expression changed. Her eyes flashed with indignation, but she could not show it. She could only lower her head. She fell silent. She was struggling and hesitating. The godly king's clone did not say anything else. He waved his hand and shot out a golden light. He collected Dubhe, who had been reduced to meat paste, and held it in his right hand. Follow me. Then, he brought Yin Shuiyin away from Planet Heaven Trader and into the void. About 15 minutes later, the two flew into the void and stood tens of thousands of miles below the passage between the two worlds. It had been 12 hours since the passage had appeared. The passage that was tens of thousands of miles long had shrunk by more than half. It was only 1,500 miles long. Furthermore, the golden divine light and lightning in the passage had dimmed significantly. In 6 hours at most, the passage between the two worlds would heal. It would be repaired by the heavenly Tao. Yin Shuiyin immediately understood. Even a most powerful godly king could only interfere with the heavenly Tao's power. They cannot truly contend against it. Just as she was in a daze, the godly king's clone spoke. What are you waiting for? His voice was cold and emotionless. Yin Shuiyin's body stiffened. She hesitated for a moment before making up her mind. She looked up and asked, Your Majesty, I was once a divine lord of the upper realm. In this life, I mastered the coiling dragon 4 seas and have a chance of breaking through to the godly king realm. In comparison, my talent and future are much brighter than Dubhe's. I hope that Your Majesty, the divine king, will understand. I am willing to serve you like a dog or horse. Even if I am a slave or a maid, I am willing to do so. Clearly, Yin Shuiyin did not wish to die. She had died a horrible death in her previous life. In this life, she was full of ambition. Not only did she want to return to the God realm for revenge, she also wanted to break through to the God King realm. In order to survive, in order to step onto the peak of the divine path, she would rather sacrifice her son, Tianshu. This was the ultimate egoist. The God King's clone naturally understood her intentions. In fact, even before she spoke and hesitated, the God King's avatar had already guessed what she was thinking. However, the God King's clone expressionlessly shook his head and refused. I can understand your feelings, but unfortunately, I can only return smoothly if you ignite your blood and transform into a deity. Furthermore, Dubhe is your son. He has inherited all of your talents and your coiling dragon 4 seas. Under this emperor's nurturing, his future achievements are limitless. Most importantly, he is not wise enough, which is why he is absolutely loyal to me. As for a beautiful, scheming, and ambitious woman like you, I don't like that at all. This was the longest sentence the God King's clone had spoken since he had descended into the mortal realm. There was no other way. He only had 30% of his divine power left. If he were at his peak, he would not have wasted his breath on Yin Shuiyin. Yin Shuiyin fell silent. Her blood-stained face revealed a bitter, cold smile. So, in the end, birth is still the most important thing? For a lowly person like me, no matter how much effort I put in, I will still end up paving the way for someone else. Right? Yin Shuiyin's voice was filled with tears of blood. Her eyes were lifeless, filled with despair and indignation. The God King's clone was expressionless as he said indifferently, Wrong. The most important thing is luck. It is fate. He. Yin Shuiyin laughed like a madwoman. Tears of blood flowed from her eyes as she looked up into the sky and roared, F***CK, your fate. I refuse to accept this. As she roared, she looked like she had gone mad. However, she had no other choice. She could only use the burning blood divine transformation technique. Her entire body ignited with bloody flames that soared into the sky. This divine ability was very common in the god realm, but it was also a forbidden divine ability. This was because its nature was very similar to self-destruction. Sacrificing everything one had, including one's life, soul, and everything one had learned in one's life, transformed into the most powerful force. Only those who were destined to die would use this divine ability to fulfill their wishes or goals. Whoosh! The bloody flames that surged into the sky burned more and more fiercely. In just a few short breaths, Yun Shuyan's flesh and soul disappeared. She turned into a bloody flame that soared into the sky and flew through the void towards the passage between the two worlds. When the bloody flames rushed into the passage, a loud, dull sound immediately rang out from within. Rumble! As the rumbling of thunder rang out, golden divine light and lightning shone brightly, bursting forth with even more power. Immediately, the passage between the two worlds stopped shrinking and gradually expanded outwards. When the passage expanded to 5,000 miles, it gradually stabilized. The God King clone looked up and muttered to himself, although this power is very weak, it's enough. Then, he carried the unconscious Ji Wuhin in his left hand and the sky pivot wrapped in golden light in his right hand as he flew towards the passage between the two worlds. As he flew through the void, his body shrank as well. The God King clone was about to return to the God realm. However, when he was still 15,000 miles away from the passage between the two worlds, a change occurred in the void behind him. Kaboom! An earth-shaking sound that sounded like a thunderclap from the 9 heavens suddenly exploded in the void. Following the loud sound, a 4,000-mile-long and 4,000-mile-wide gap actually collapsed in the cold, pitch-black void. Resplendent golden light, white light, purple lightning, scarlet flames, and icy blue divine light lit up in the huge gap. 5-color divine light and lightning bolts firmly supported the gap. Another passage between the two worlds appeared. When the God King clone heard the loud sound, his expression immediately changed, and he subconsciously looked back. He saw 2 sky-blotting dark, golden dragon claws extend from the passage between the two worlds and strike the God King clone with supreme divine might. That's right, the God King clone didn't appear in the newly appeared passage between the two worlds, only the sky-blotting dark golden dragon claws. The God King clone's expression changed drastically at the sight of this. His eyes revealed unparalleled fury and shock. It's you. The God King clone roared in fury, shaking the void for tens of thousands of miles. However, no one answered from the passage between the two worlds, nor did any god appear. Only the 2 dark golden dragon claws slammed into the God King's avatar with the fastest speed and the most violent power. Chapter 2753. Bam! An earth-shattering sound erupted, shaking the void for millions of miles. The first dark golden dragon claw slammed into the God King clone. Under the incomparably violent power, the God King's clone was sent flying back, tumbling 100,000 miles away. But at this moment, the second dark golden dragon claw slammed in front of him. Strangely, this dragon claw suddenly changed direction and slashed at the God King clone's left arm like a giant blade. Crack! With a crisp sound, the God King clone's left arm broke on the spot, turning into golden light and dissipating. The unconscious Ji Wuhin, who was being carried by the God King clone's left arm, instantly fell into the void. With a flip of his dark golden dragon claw, he grabbed Ji Wuhin in his palm. Then, with a flash of golden light, the dragon claw retracted into the passage and disappeared. Even the passageway between the two worlds was rapidly closing. In the blink of an eye, the 5-colored light and lightning disappeared, the passage disappeared, and the void regained its calm. You damned bastard, You're despicable to the extreme. The God King clone, whose left arm had been cut off, flew for 90,000 miles before stopping. He couldn't feel any pain, but he was infuriated by endless anger and humiliation. What infuriated him the most was that the dragon claw immediately retracted after snatching Ji Wuan, not giving him a chance to fight back at all. Bastard. Despicable bastard. This emperor will definitely go find you. I'll skin you alive, pull out your tendons, and scatter your soul. The God King clone stood in the void and roared furiously, venting his endless anger. He originally wanted to spare Ji Wuhan's life and personally direct a good show, but he didn't expect that someone else would intercept him just as he was about to return to the God realm. This was a great humiliation. However, the God King clone quickly calmed down and calmed his anger. The passage above his head started to shrink again. Clearly, Yun Shuyan's blood ignition divinity transformation power was too weak and could only hold on for a moment. The God King clone didn't waste any more time. Holding the sky pivot wrapped in golden light, he jumped into the passage. Swoosh! The wretched and weak God King clone disappeared. Not long after, the passageway between the two worlds closed. The void returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Only the messy heaven Fa star floated quietly in the void. Tens of millions of miles away from it was a huge, invisible gravitational field and a black hole with a circumference of 100 million miles. On the other side, in the void a billion miles away from the Heaven Punisher star, the Five Elements world was also floating quietly without any ripples. The Five Elements world was still peaceful. The tens of billions of martial artists and common people on the 5 continents had no idea what was going on. He was still living his life the way he used to. Only by being in the void could one see the changes in the 5 Elements world clearly. It was very strange and inconceivable. The golden light barrier that enveloped the 5 Elements world was 800 million miles wide. However, at this moment, such a huge golden light barrier was actually collapsing and rapidly dissipating. Since ancient times, this golden light barrier had protected the 5 Elements world for more than 30,000 years. But now, it was dissipating at a speed visible to the naked eye. No one saw that there was a special pattern to the disappearance of the golden light barrier. They disappeared from all directions and gradually converged towards the center. At the center of the golden light barrier, there was a ball of condensed golden light that was gradually shrinking. This ball of golden light had a circumference of 10,000 miles, but it was constantly shrinking as if it was condensing into a pearl. Deep in the ruins of God, in the 9 heavens, 10 absolutes tower, at the highest point of the tower on the 9th floor. This was a special space with a circumference of about 10,000 feet. There was eternal darkness in all directions, but in the middle was a dazzling golden sea of fire. This was the divine power of the phoenix, the nirvana divine flame. The surging golden sea of fire was wrapped in eternal darkness like a fireball with a circumference of 10,000 feet. Ever since Jiku had refined the tower, she could only enter the first 7 floors. It was on the 7th floor that she had practiced the divine power of the ancient demon god and cultivated 5 types of divine flames. However, the 8th and 9th floors were still forbidden, and she could not enter or leave. This also led to her not knowing what secrets were hidden in the last 2 floors of the tower. However, at this moment, in the fireball formed by the Nirvana divine flame on the 9th floor, there was a slender figure of a woman who was 7 feet tall, sleeping quietly in the golden sea of fire. She had long, fiery red hair, and her face and figure were extremely beautiful. Her temperament was also elegant and noble, like a goddess from the 9 heavens. Her eyes were tightly shut, and she was sleeping quietly in the golden sea of fire. If Ji, Tianxing, Yin Yao, and the others were here, they would definitely recognize her at a glance. She was Ji Ke. Of course, she was still an illusion and not a physical body. However, as time passed, this illusion became more and more real and subtle. 3 days, 5 days, 10 days. After about half a month, the illusion condensed to the extreme and started to grow flesh. In a nirvana divine flame, a new life began. At the same time, in the depths of the five elements world's core, the core of the world, which was wrapped in endless lava, was still a golden ball of light with a circumference of 10,000 miles. Outside the ball of light was endless crimson lava, boiling and surging, forming countless gorgeous and magnificent images. And inside the golden ball of light was eternal silence. The air was filled with golden divine light, and strands of it were like clouds. In the middle of the ball of light was still the golden mountain that was thousands of feet tall. 10,000 meridians extended from the foot of the mountain, covering 100,000 miles of space. And on the golden mountain peak, there was an 8-foot-long, handsome figure lying there. Even though it was just an illusion, it was extremely lifelike and detailed. He had a head full of black hair, a handsome face, and sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. A snow-white robe wrapped around his body, adding a bit of mystery to his aura. Without a doubt, he was Ji Tianxing. After he was killed by the Divine King's clone, the heaven-mending pearl turned into a white light and escaped. His phantom image appeared here. After all, he had already refined the five elements world and merged with it. If the five elements world was not destroyed, how could he die? Now, half a month had already passed. Ji Tianxing's illusion was sleeping here. His figure had already become extremely solid and was growing flesh. In the depths of his mind, there was still a walnut-sized ball of light flickering with a faint white light. That was the heaven-mending pearl. Apart from that, there was also a pitch-black thin needle in the ball of light. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that it was not a needle, but a divine sword. It was the burial of heaven's sword that had shrunk countless times. However, the blade was full of cracks, and it had obviously suffered heavy damage. As time passed, a month quickly passed. The burial of heaven sword hidden in the heaven-mending pearl was the first to recover its vitality. Swoosh! The burial of heaven sword flew out and floated in the air, quickly returning to its normal size. And at this time, Ji Tianxing's body of flesh and blood had also completed its rebirth. Other than the fact that he was still unconscious, everything else was exactly the same as before. End of chapter. Chapter 2754. In his days, Ji Tianxing felt as if he was in a dream. He had lost his body, leaving only his invisible soul floating above the myriad worlds. It might have been tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. During such a long period of time, his soul had always been at the top of the heavens, looking down at the trichiliocosm and the endless void. He watched with his own eyes as one barren and weak star after another gradually grew stronger. Then, those stars gathered the five elements and received the protection of the divine light from the heavenly Tao. Then, those stars went from being barren and withered to being reborn, and countless living beings emerged. Thousands of living beings continued to grow stronger, creating their own civilizations, building one kingdom after another, blooming with brilliant light. However, as time passed, those worlds that were once prosperous to the extreme died one after another. The billions of living beings on the stars continued to wither, finally returning to coldness and loneliness. As for those enormous stars, they began to shatter one after another and fall apart. Either they turned into star fragments, becoming shooting stars that cut through the void, leaving behind their final brilliance, or they turned into broken, desolate, and dead stars, waiting to be destroyed, or the next generation of new life. Just like that, Ji Tianxing watched from the top of the heavens for hundreds of thousands of years. He watched the stars flicker and extinguish, the rise and fall of the myriad races in the world. He watched things turn in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme. He watched the cycle of prosperity and decline. He saw through the vicissitudes of time and all the vanity. During this period, no matter how the endless stars in the void changed, there were only 3,000 stars that were enveloped by the divine light of the heavenly Tao and had wisdom, life, and civilization. Not one more, not one less. When the long period of time was about to end, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but raise his head to take a look, because he knew that this dream was about to end. And before the dream ended, he really wanted to know what was above the trichiliocosm and the boundless starry sky. Then, he saw that there seemed to be an invisible barrier above his head. It was like a transparent crystal, but also like a frozen water surface. On the ice surface further away, or rather above the sky, there were 3 huge suns floating. They formed horns on each other and stood in a tripartite balance. 2 of them shone with golden light, even more dazzling than the sun. As for the other one, it was hazy with 7 colors, making it seem both real and illusory. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment, and he couldn't help but wonder. 3? Why are there 3 of them? How could there be 3 of them? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he left the dream and finally woke up. Phew! Ji Tianxing let out a long breath, as if he had just woken up from a million years of slumber, and opened his eyes. What entered his eyes was the divine golden light that floated in the sky like strands of silk. Even higher up in the sky, there was a golden barrier that covered the sky. It was like a ball of light that covered a radius of 100,000 miles. Outside the golden ball of light, there was an endless amount of red magma that surged violently. Seeing this familiar scene, Ji Tianxing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and a smile appeared on his face. My guess was right. I ended up back here. He could already tell that this was the inner part of the 5 elements world, the core of the world deep in the Earth's core. That was right. When he fought with the God King's avatar, he was certain that he would lose. What kind of joke was this? He did not even reach the celestial deity realm. What right did he have to defeat the God King's avatar? Even if that was just a God King's avatar, his strength weakened to the extreme after descending into the mortal world. But 1% of a peak God King strength was also comparable to a Divine Lord powerhouse. A Divine Lord was absolutely invincible in a mortal world. Therefore, Ji Tianxing was bound to lose. Furthermore, he would be beaten to death by the God King's avatar. But he was not afraid, nor was he worried. He still fought with the God King's avatar for several hours. Why? Because he had the greatest reliance, which was the 5-element world. He had long merged into one with the 5 elements world. As long as the 5 elements world was not destroyed, he would never die. Moreover, he still had the heaven-mending pearl, this divine artifact. Even if the heaven-mending pearl's power recovered was less than 10% of a king-level divine artifact. But for that God King's avatar to want to blast the heaven-mending pearl and annihilate his divine soul, it was also absolutely impossible. As long as his divine soul was not destroyed, he would not die. This way, Ji Tianxing's life had 2 guarantees. What was there to fear? Now, he woke up inside the world's core, which verified this point. Ji Tianxing straightened his waist and sat up. Reaching out his left hand, he grasped the sword of burial of heaven in his hand. Without needing to use his eyes to see, his divine sense immediately sensed that the sword of burial of heaven also recovered to its original state. He lowered his head and looked at his body, sizing up a few glances around. His body completely recovered, no different from before. The only difference was that he was currently a half-step celestial deity realm. Unlike before, it was 99 times of a peak true God, strengthened to the limit. The difference between the two was that he was ascending to the divine world now. After going through the Ascension Pool's baptism, he would break through to level 1 celestial deity realm. If it were before, when he ascended to the divine world, he would directly break through to level 5 celestial deity realm. This made Ji Tianxing feel a little disappointed in his heart. However, this doesn't matter too much either. If I devour another 100 stars, I can still strengthen to the limit. Apart from this, there was one more thing that also made his heart ache a little. Even though he revived inside the world's core, his spatial ring was gone. It must have been destroyed when the Divine King's clone killed him. Even though his most important secrets and treasures were stored in the sword of burial of heaven. But there were hundreds of millions of source stones stored in the spatial ring. and the divine-level resources that he plundered from various major starfields were worth at least 1 trillion. With those source stones and divine-level resources, it was enough for him, Yun Yao, and the others to cultivate for thousands of years. But now, everything in the spatial ring was destroyed. Ji Tianxing sighed and murmured, "Forget it. No matter how many source stones and divine-level resources there are, they're just worldly possessions. If worldly possessions were gone, at most, he could just search for more. As long as he was still alive and his strength was still there, it was his greatest reliance. I wonder if the Divine King's clone left planet Heaven Trader after killing me. Yao Yao, could the two children by Long, Qian Yu, and the others should still be in the Five Elements world, waiting for my news, right? I've been there for so long, and there's no news. They must be very worried." Ji Tianxing put away the sword of burial of heaven and frowned. However, with Yao Yao and Ku's temperament, if they can't contact me for so long, they will most likely leave the Five Elements world and go to planet Heaven Trader to help me. After the Divine King's clone killed me, if I meet them again, the consequences will be unimaginable. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing was full of worry. He couldn't care about anything else and hurriedly channeled his energy into the golden mountain under his feet. Through the world vein, he left the world's core. Swoosh! In the next moment, he appeared out of thin air in the north of the divine ruins, outside the Juqian Absolute's tower. He hurriedly took out the small golden tower and disappeared from the spot in a flash. After returning to the 5th level of the divine tower, he hurriedly entered the 6th level to distort space and time. However, the scene of distorted space and time made his expression change on the spot. Chapter 2755. In the huge distorted space-time, there was dead silence. Ji Tianxing released his divine sense and searched every corner, but he did not see a single person. Yin Yao was not here, Jiku was not here, the white dragon was not here, and the two children were not here either. In fact, even the 4 divine beasts were nowhere to be seen. Ji Tianxing's heart surged with deep uneasiness and worry. He had a premonition that the worst outcome that he had guessed had probably already happened. Thus, he hurriedly left the divine tower and took out the source stone jade slip. He sent a message to everyone, including the 4 divine beasts. After a long wait of an hour, he still did not receive a reply. All the messages that he sent out were like stones sinking into the sea. Ji Tianxing's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. His expression and eyes were solemn to the extreme. Swoosh! He hurriedly used the power of the world and left the Five Elements world. A moment later, he appeared in the dark and cold void. Fortunately, the Five Elements world was still in place and did not move at all. But what surprised Ji Tianxing was that the sacred golden light that enveloped the Five Elements world actually disappeared. The divine light barrier of the Five Elements world is related to the ancient goddess Yaoguang. How could it suddenly disappear? Ji Tianxing was full of doubts. He sensitively sensed that something big must have happened. Thus, he circled around the dim Five Elements world and flew at top speed in the void. 8 days later, he stopped in the void, his eyes fixed on the Five Elements world, and landed at the center point. That's right. The golden light barrier that enveloped the Five Elements world had indeed disappeared. In other words, the Five Elements world had lost its seal, and at the same time, it had also lost its special protection. However, the golden light barrier did not completely disappear. Somewhere in the Five Elements world, there was an extremely small light spot. Ji Tianxing was full of doubts and flew towards that light spot. A day later, he arrived in front of the light spot. Only then did he see clearly that it was a ball of sacred golden light with a radius of 90 feet. In the pure and flawless golden ball of light, a figure was sleeping soundly. It was a figure with a graceful figure and a beautiful face that could topple nations. The familiar waist-length hair, the moon-white dress, and the face that was like a masterpiece made Ji Tianxing's body tremble. Yao Yao! Ji Tianxing instantly recognized that the sleeping figure in the light ball was Yun Yao. However, Yun Yao's eyes were closed, and she was still unconscious. Could it be that Yao Yao was also killed by the deity king's clone? She was reborn, just like me, resurrected in the divine light fortress? At this moment, she's like me in the past. She's spending a long period of time in the dreamscape and looking down at the myriad of worlds. In just a few breaths of time, Ji Tianxing guessed the reason. As it turned out, his guess was correct. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others must have gone a planet raiding and met the deity king's avatar. Ji Tianxing suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. He was extremely anxious. If Yao Yao is resurrected here, then what about Ku? What about our children? What about the white dragon and the 4 divine beasts? He murmured with a cold face. He hurriedly controlled the power of the world to search in the 5 elements world. He had to find the others, especially Ku and the 2 children. Whether he went to heaven or hell, he had to find them. However, things did not go as he wished. After an entire day, Ji Tianxing searched all over the 5 elements world and searched all the places where the others might appear. However, he still could not find a single one. Planet raiding. There's still planet raiding. In his despair, a thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind as he thought of the Star of Heaven punishment. That was his last hope. He flew through the void without hesitation and went straight to planet raiding. In order to reach there as quickly as possible, he did not hesitate to consume the remaining power of the world in his body and raised his speed to the limit. 10 days later, Ji Tianxing appeared on planet raiding. After the successive disasters, planet raiding was already in a terrible state. 3 of the 5 continents were destroyed, and the last 2 continents were also in chaos. Of the initial 30 billion people, only about 10 billion were left. More than 80% of the martial gods had died in the war. Only a small number of soldiers and experts had escaped from planet raiding and rushed to planet celestial chaos. Now, planet raiding was truly without a leader. The 10 billion people on the 2 continents had been in chaos and fear. Killings occurred everywhere. The people's hearts were in turmoil, and the war was in full swing. The news of the destruction of the Arch Palace and the death of the Thearch's son and the Empress had already spread throughout planet raiding. The surviving people all knew that planet raiding was finished. The more powerful leaders and experts all wanted to escape from planet raiding as soon as possible. However, without enough forces, resources, and battleships, they could not leave at all. As a result, hundreds of great forces broke out into a great battle royale and slaughtered one another. In order to escape from planet raiding and go to their new home, and in order to survive, they did not care about the friendship of their own race and raised their weapons against their own race. Human nature was evil. For survival, benefits, and status, they would be keen on internal strife. No matter in time and space, in any world, for any race, this was the universal truth. After Ji Tianxing arrived at planet raiding, he used the power of the world to check the situation of the 2 continents. In just a few hours, he saw the situation of planet raiding. At the same time, he also received the most important news. The Arch Palace has been destroyed. Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyan are both dead. Ji Tianxing immediately realized that this matter must have something to do with Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others. Therefore, he controlled the power of the world and went to the old site of the Arch Palace. There used to be an endless sea of clouds thousands of miles high in the sky. Now, there were thousands of holes and gaps in the sea of clouds hundreds of thousands of miles wide. Even though 2 months had passed since the war, those holes and gaps had not disappeared. Even the sea within a radius of 300,000 miles under the sky had become a dried-up land that looked like ruins. Countless powerful divine powers were still left in the ruins. The mixed divine power was like a transparent wall that filled the ruins and blocked off the endless seawater around them. In about a year or 2, those mixed divine powers would dissipate. At that time, the seawater in all directions would no longer be obstructed and would drown the ruins. When the sea returned to normal, the traces of the war would also be covered. Ji Tianxing stood in the sea of clouds with his eyes closed. He was releasing his divine sense to cover the surrounding 100,000 miles and carefully investigate. At the same time, he also used the power of the world to protect the ruins. This was because as soon as he arrived, he detected the most familiar auras. First of all, the divine power of the Divine King's clone was the most violent and overbearing. Secondly, there were the auras of Yun Yao and Ji Ku, as well as the auras of Bai Long, Ji Wu Shuang, and the three divine beasts. The facts proved that they had indeed been to the Arch Palace and had fought here for a long time. The aura of the Divine King's clone was the strongest, which proved that he had fought here and released a powerful divine power. By the time Ji Tianxing found these clues, the answer was already obvious. He immediately guessed that they had most likely died here. Chapter 2756. Ji Tianxing stood in the sky and formed a divine art with both hands. Light shadows appeared in front of him. He was using a divine power secret art, time reversal divine ability. Although this divine power couldn't turn back time, it could use the situation of this world and the chaotic divine power to recreate the original scene. Swoosh! When Ji Tianxing formed the 68th seal, the white light in front of him suddenly condensed. A white light with a radius of 100 feet appeared in front of him like a light screen. Then, the huge light screen showed the blue sea, the blue sky, and the white clouds, showing many fragmented images. As Ji Tianxing cast the art, the fragmented images kept changing. The scene in the image was going against the flow, moving back to 2 months ago. After a while, the images on the light screen moved to 2 months ago. Hundreds of fragmented images immediately appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. He clearly saw that the Arch Palace hadn't been destroyed yet. Thousands of battleships were gathered at the gate, and there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers and guards in the Arch Palace. Many battleships were loading soldiers and leaving the Arch Palace. However, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others led the 4 divine beasts into the Arch Palace quietly. A fierce battle broke out. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had won a complete victory. They had killed all the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army and destroyed thousands of battleships. Not long after, Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin appeared one after another. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others surrounded Tian Shu and Yun Shuiyin and severely injured them. The entire Arch Palace was also destroyed, turning into a desolate ruin. But at this moment, the avatar of the Divine King, who is thousands of miles tall, rushed over from the distant sky. His strength was unparalleled, and he easily blocked everyone's joint attack. Then, he seemed to be angered. He killed the glazed fire dragon with a punch and blasted it into powder. Then, he killed the black dragon with a palm strike and blasted it into pieces. Then, he killed Qinyu with a finger strike and blasted it into pieces. Then the Divine King's avatar used his ultimate divine power, space freezing, explosion. Immediately, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wu Shuang, and Bai Long's bodies collapsed and were torn into pieces. They were turned into hundreds of pieces and killed by the Divine King's avatar one by one. All of them had died. When he saw these scenes, Ji Tianxing was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His eyes turned blood red. He didn't go crazy, nor did he roar. Suppressing the boundless hatred and endless killing intent in his chest, he muttered to himself in a low and hoarse voice, "No matter who you are, even if I have to kill everyone in the God realm, I will tear you to pieces. No matter who the Divine King was. No matter how strong he was, how powerful he was, how high his power and status was. His wife, children, friends, and himself had all been killed by the God King's avatar. If he didn't take revenge for such a blood feud, he wouldn't be a man." After a long time, Ji Tianxing gradually suppressed his anger and killing intent. He stared at the light screen with bloodshot eyes and suddenly thought of a problem. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wu Shuang, and Bai Long had all been killed by the Divine King's avatar. But what about his son, Ji Wuhin and Lan Kuan? Why didn't the Divine King's avatar kill them? Soon, Ji Tianxing saw the result. Lan Kuan couldn't bear the humiliation and self-detonated before the Divine King's avatar could capture it. It was this self-detonation that weakened the Divine King's avatar greatly. Ji Wuhin also fainted. In the end, only the Divine King's avatar, Ji Wuhin, Yin Shui-yin and Tian Shu were left in the sky. Tian Shu had long been turned into a pile of meat paste and was being protected by the heavily injured Yin Shui-yin. Then, the Divine King's avatar exchanged a few words with her and left with her Tian Shu and Ji Wuhan. At this point, Ji Tianxing understood what had happened. He didn't need to guess to know what had happened. The Divine King's avatar must have taken Yin Shui-yin, Tian Shu, and Ji Wuhan to the depths of the void. Ji Tianxing's expression was gloomy. He frowned and analyzed. The Divine King's avatar didn't kill Wuhan and instead took him away. It's most likely because Wuhan is like me. That damn bastard. He wants to bring Wuhan back to the divine realm and nurture him into a sharp blade. He must have guessed that I'm not truly dead and will go to the divine realm to seek revenge sooner or later. Therefore, he used Wuhan as a trump card to deal with me at the critical moment. What a vicious mind. Ji Tianxing analyzed and guessed the Divine King's avatar's scheme. However, this also made him feel slightly relieved. At least, after Wuhan was brought back to the divine realm, his life wouldn't be in danger before he sought revenge on the Divine King. However, it was inevitable that Wuhan would suffer a lot of cruel torment. Ji Tianxing took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He continued to analyze. The Divine King's avatar is already very weak. It's already very difficult for him to bring Wuhan back to the divine realm. He probably won't take Yin Shui-yin and Tian Shu with him. First, it's impossible. Second, Tian Shu's talent is far inferior to my son Wuhan's. When he thought of this, Ji Tianxing was somewhat puzzled. No, if the Divine King's avatar didn't take Yin Shui-yin and her son away, they must have returned to the heaven-punishing planet to recuperate. Why is the heaven-punishing planet without a leader? Rumor has it that Yin Shui-yin and her son are dead? No, there must be a problem here. Out of instinct, Ji Tianxing wanted to go to the void and use the time reversal ability to see what was going on. However, he could only suppress this thought and do something more important first. Resurrect Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts. That's right, resurrect everyone who had died. He had the heaven-mending pearl, and there were still a few thousand life-saving divine lights left in it. They had the heaven-defying effect of resurrecting the dead. After Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, and the others were killed, their corpses, flesh, and divine soul fragments were scattered in the ruins. This was where the Divine Emperor Palace was located, and it had always been a forbidden area for the Heaven Punishers. Ever since the end of the war, no one dared to come here. After all, the billions of Heaven Punishers on the 2 continents had long fallen into chaos and war. How could they care about anything else? This gave Ji Tianxing hope of resurrecting everyone. As long as he could find everyone's corpses and divine soul fragments, he could use the life-saving divine lights to resurrect them. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time and hurriedly searched the ruins. The reason why this area was filled with everyone's aura and hadn't dissipated after 2 months was because everyone's corpses were still here. Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, and the others were all peak true god experts. Even if they were killed, their corpses shattered, and their divine souls shattered, they wouldn't dissipate even after 100 years. Ji Tianxing searched the ruins carefully and quickly found a large amount of flesh, bones, and divine soul fragments. There were his daughter Ji Wushuang, his disciple Bai Long, Qianyu, and Black Dragon. Only Ji Ku, Lan Kuan, and the glazed fire dragon's corpses were not found. Ji Tianxing collected the flesh, bones, and divine soul fragments and analyzed with a serious expression. Lan Kuan would rather die than submit, and he has already self-destructed. His corpses and divine soul no longer exist. Even if I have the life-saving divine lights, I can't do anything. The glazed fire dragon was blasted into dust, and it was the first to be killed. Later, when the Divine King's clone fought with everyone, the aftermath of the battle destroyed the dust and divine soul fragments. As such, Lan Kuan and the glazed fire dragon can't be saved. As for Cuckoo, she has inherited the divine ability of the divine bird phoenix, so she should be able to be reborn. Chapter 2757. Ji Tianxing was a little depressed, and his heart was filled with regret. However, Lan Kuan and the glazed fire dragon could not be saved. He was only a peak true god now, not a powerful divine king. Even if he wanted to revive Lan Kuan and the glazed fire dragon, there was nothing he could do. I hope I can still meet you in my next life. At that time, I will definitely take good care of you and not let you suffer such a tragedy again. Ji Tianxing looked at the ruins with a sorrowful gaze and murmured in his heart. Then, he put away his heavy and sorrowful heart and began the revival plan. The remains of his daughter Wu Shuang, his disciple White Dragon, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon were all mixed together and piled up into a small mountain that was 10 feet tall. After all, Qian Yu and Black Dragon had revealed their original bodies before they were killed. After they were killed, the remains that could be preserved until now were only 1,000th of their original bodies. Ji Tianxing carefully examined the pile of remains and first picked out his daughter Wu Shuang's remains and divine soul fragments. Within 15 minutes, he finished his selection. His once innocent and extremely cute daughter had now become a pile of bones and flesh that were as fine as sand and 9 divine soul fragments. Ji Tianxing felt extremely guilty, and his heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. That was his most beloved and most obedient daughter. However, the matter at hand was more important. He restrained his emotions and released the life-saving divine light in the heaven-mending pearl. Swoosh! A sacred white light surged out of his palm and enveloped the pile of bones and divine soul fragments. In order to successfully revive Ji Wushuang, Ji Tianxing used 100 sets of life-saving divine light. That was the power to revive 100 martial gods. Ji Wushuang was a peak true god. After she was killed, only this little bit of remains would be left. It would definitely consume 10 times, 100 times more life-saving divine light. The facts proved that Ji Tianxing's estimation was correct. The 100 sets of life-saving divine light enveloped Ji Wushuang's remains and surged for 4 hours. It was not until 4 hours later that the divine light stopped surging. Within the white light, a petite and cute figure appeared. Her appearance was as beautiful as Yun Yao, and her temperament was innocent and cute to the extreme. She looked like she was only 8 or 9 years old. Her eyes were tightly closed, and she was in a deep sleep. Ji Wushuang was successfully resurrected. His height, appearance, bloodline, and aptitude were exactly the same as before. Ji Tianxing secretly heaved a sigh of relief, and his heavy heart eased a lot. He knew that although Wushuang had been resurrected, he was still weak, and his divine soul was still in a heavily injured state. She would have to sleep for at least 10 years before she could wake up. As for her injuries, it would take 30 to 40 years for her to recover. It would take 100 years for his strength to recover. But none of this was important. As long as his daughter was alive, it would be a blessing. Ji Tianxing placed the unconscious Wushuang into the sword world of the burial of heaven and let her sleep in a place where she could heal her injuries. Then, he selected the white dragon's bones and soul fragments from the mountainous sea of consciousness. A quarter of an hour later, the white dragon's bones and divine soul fragments were picked out. The remains of his bones and flesh could fill up a basin, but there were only 8 pieces of his soul. Ji Tianxing released another 100 rays of life-saving divine light, enveloping the white dragon skeleton. 6 hours later, the white dragon was also successfully revived. Of course, he was also in a comatose state. His divine soul was heavily injured, and his strength was incomparably weak. Ji Tianxing also placed the white dragon into the sword world. Next was to revive Qian Yu and the black dragon. The remaining remains of the two were obviously larger in size and had more distinct characteristics. Of course, Qian Yu had more bones left, and the black dragon had fewer. Ji Tianxing used 120 rays of life-saving divine light to revive Qian Yu. When he revived the black dragon, not only did he use 150 rays of life-saving divine light, he also spent an additional 4 hours. Just like that, a day passed. Those that could be revived were all revived. Ji Tianxing finished casting the spell and placed Qian Yu and the black dragon into the sword world, letting them rest in a deep sleep. Although he was somewhat haggard and exhausted, he did not dare to delay. However, he didn't dare to waste any time. He quickly left the heaven-punishing planet and entered the void. Outside Planet Heaven Trader, Ji Tianxing stood in the void somewhere. He looked up at the void and nodded slightly. According to his memory, the passage between the two worlds opened when the Divine King's clone descended to the mortal world was right above his head. Perhaps it was at a height of 30,000 miles, or perhaps it was at a height of 28,000 miles. In short, the error was not big. It should be in that area. After confirming the location, Ji Tianxing used the time reversal divine power again. Swoosh! Soon, a huge light screen with a radius of 1,000 feet appeared in the void in front of him. As he cast the spell, images quickly appeared on the light screen. Although those images were of the dark void, they were somewhat messy and fragmented, and they were changing rapidly. Ji Tianxing was casting the spell to reverse the time 2 months ago. After a full 15 minutes, some dazzling light appeared in the fragmented images. It was dazzling divine light of various colors, and there were many flashes of lightning. After a while, the image that Ji Tianxing wanted to see the most appeared. In the void, there was a gap that was 3,000 kilometers long, and within it, divine light and lightning flashed. That was the passage between the two worlds opened by the Divine King's clone, and it had shrunk by more than half. Before long, the Divine King's clone carried the unconscious Ji Wuhan in his left hand and W wrapped in golden light in his right hand. He arrived at the passage between the two worlds. Not far behind him, Yin Shuiyin, who was covered in blood, also followed. It was unknown what the Divine King's clone said to her, but she suddenly laughed crazily. Her blood-stained face was filled with unwillingness and despair. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, vaguely guessing the truth. Then, Yin Shuiyin burned herself in unwillingness, turning into a bloody flame that soared into the sky and rushed into the passage between the two worlds. The passage between the two worlds, which had already shrunk, expanded to 5,000 kilometers. Ji Tianxing murmured expressionlessly, "Just as I expected, blood ignition, divine transformation. Could it be that the Divine King's clone really brought my son Wuhan and Dubby back to the God realm?" He was very worried, and he stared at the light screen without blinking. Soon, the Divine King's clone flew toward the passage between the two worlds with Ji Wuhan and Dubby. The Divine King's clone was about to enter the passage and return to the God realm. But at this moment, a 5-color divine light suddenly lit up in the void not far away, and a passage between the two worlds appeared. 2 dark golden dragon claws that blotted out the sky reached out from the passage between the two worlds, violently swatting at the Divine King's clone. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing's body stiffened, and his eyes widened in disbelief. A Divine King powerhouse from the Dragon Realm? It actually attacked the Divine King's clone at this critical moment? What is it trying to do? Loot a burning house? Or is it seeking revenge? Ji Tianxing's heart was filled with shock, and his curiosity was at its peak. Then he saw a dragon claw send the Divine King's clone flying. The other dark golden dragon claw severed the Divine King's clone's left arm and snatched away the unconscious Ji Wuhan. Apart from that, the 2 dragon claws didn't do anything else, directly retracting into the passage between the two worlds and disappearing. Not long after, the passage between the two worlds disappeared. The Divine King's clone also entered the passage between the two worlds and returned to the God realm. The scene on the light screen dissipated. Ji Tianxing was stunned on the spot, silent for a long time. Chapter 2758. West Sea Dragon King? East Sea Dragon King? North Sea Dragon King? Or Golden Dragon King? Or maybe that old ruffian dragon? Ji Tianxing stood in the air, frowning as he pondered. Which Dragon King took Ji Wuhan away? Although it was 2 dark golden dragon claws that attacked the Divine King's clone and snatched Ji Wuhan, that didn't mean anything. The Dragon Kings that Ji Tianxing mentioned could all have that ability. That was why he pondered with a serious expression and analyzed the situation based on his memories. When Kenshin left the Five Elements world and ascended to the upper realm, he didn't directly ascend to the God realm. Under a free combination of factors, he actually ascended to the Dragon realm. This seemed to be related to the space-time roulette. But the space-time roulette was destroyed long ago, so the result was no longer important. The Dragon realm and the God realm were two independent eternal worlds. Although the two worlds were connected and had a few special passages, it wasn't something that could be passed through by ordinary people. That was why Kenshin cultivated in the Dragon realm for more than 200 years. He also had enough understanding of the Dragon realm situation. There were many divine king powerhouses in the Dragon realm, even more than in the God realm. There were more than 1,000 of them. However, there were only 5 peak divine kings that could rule the 4 seas of the God realm and Middle-earth. Ji Tianxing knew 3 of the 5 peak divine kings. He had never met 2 of them before, but he had heard of them and had a basic understanding of them. As for the 3 peak divine kings that he knew, their relationship with him was a little complicated. One of them called him brother, and the other was a gentleman's friend. As for the guy that he called Old Ruffian Dragon, he was both a friend and a foe. It couldn't be helped. The Old Ruffian Dragon was too capricious and temperamental. His attitude towards him was the kind that admired and appreciated each other, but he was also very jealous and hated him, always going against him. Because of this, his relationship with the Old Ruffian Dragon also caused many powerhouses in the Dragon realm to be confused. If he was in danger, the Old Ruffian Dragon would be the happiest. Not only did he not lend a helping hand, he even mocked and ridiculed him, causing trouble for him, and even adding insult to injury. However, if he really encountered great danger and was about to die, the Old Ruffian Dragon's Dracona personality would immediately split apart. While mocking him, they killed all his enemies and helped him out of danger. It was simply, she was talking about villains, but her hands were doing something to save him. The Grand Dragon's personality had split. The Western Sea Dragon King and the Eastern Sea Dragon King have always kept a low profile, not showing themselves before others. They do not have much interaction with me. The 2 of them shouldn't meddle in other people's business, and they may not necessarily discover that Wuhan is my son. However, the Golden Dragon King is a very close friend of mine, so there's a very good chance that he'll save me. The North Sea Dragon King and I have a good relationship. Maybe he will help me. If Wuhan was saved by them, then I wouldn't be too worried. The one I'm most worried about is that Old Ruffian Dragon. It's true that a good dragon doesn't live long, and it's a scourge for 100,000 years. Ji Tianxing didn't dare to imagine what would happen if Wuhan fell into Old Ruffian's hands. But in the end, he was still relieved. Wuhan falling into the Dragon realm was better than falling into the hands of the Divine King. After thinking for a long time, he let out a sigh. When I was in the God realm, there was no Divine King or Dragon King who could interfere with the lightning, tribulation, and the heavenly Tao. Now that 1,000 years have passed, not only can the Divine King interfere with the lightning, tribulation, and the heavenly Tao to open the passage between the 2 worlds. Even the Dragon King of the Dragon realm can break open the passage between the 2 worlds and interfere with the affairs of the mortal world. The world has changed. Ji Tianxing already had a premonition that the God realm and the Dragon realm would change greatly, and they would no longer be the 2 worlds he was familiar with. Forget it. Let's solve the matter in front of me first. After I recover my divine sovereign realm, I'll go to the Dragon realm to find Wuhan. Then he strode across the void and rushed back to the 5 Elements world with a single step. On the way back, he had already planned out the next plan. At the same time, he also recalled the scene he saw in the dream when he was sleeping. A dream of 1,000,000 years, life and death, reincarnation, rise and fall, wither and glory are all in front of me. As long as one is under the heavenly Tao, even the most powerful divine king can't escape the rules of the heavenly Tao, can't escape life, death, and reincarnation. Only by transcending reincarnation can one break through the shackles of the heavenly Tao, surpass all life, and be immortal. Years ago, as a peak divine king, he had been fighting for this. He explored the realm above the divine king, seeking to transcend reincarnation and surpass the power of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, he risked his life to explore the ancient ruins. After obtaining the heaven-punishing formation, he was besieged by various divine kings and died with hatred. But in this life, he seemed to have seen the light of dawn and had the hope of taking the last step. 3 sons, huh? Ha ha. Interesting. Ji Tianqing returned to the vicinity of the Five Elements world, stared at the dim light of the Five Elements world, and muttered meaningfully. After a while, he landed outside the heaven-punishing planet and came in front of Yin Yao. The golden ball of light, with a radius of 90 feet, was still wrapped around Yin Yao. She was still unconscious. Her divine body had already been reformed, and the injuries to her divine soul no longer existed. Moreover, she seemed to be absorbing some kind of energy. Not only did her strength recover to the level of a half-step heavenly god, it was also continuously strengthening. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing's heart moved slightly, and a bold idea appeared in his mind. After Goddess Yao Wang fell, her 7 souls turned into 7 divine pearls. Many years ago, Yao Yao refined 5 divine pearls. For so many years, I have searched the entire Five Elements world, and even all the major galaxies, but I still couldn't find the 6th and 7th pearls. But now, the divine light barrier protecting the Five Elements world has disappeared, and Yao Yao is resurrected here. Could it be that the divine light barrier was formed by the 6th divine pearl? Even Ji Tianqing himself was shocked by this bold guess. It's very possible. No wonder I couldn't find the 6th divine pearl, even after searching the entire Five Elements world. So it was already in front of me, but I didn't notice it, and I didn't dare to imagine it. After confirming this answer, Ji Tianqing was sure that not only would Yin Yao be resurrected safely, but her strength would also skyrocket. He stopped worrying and hurriedly entered the Five Elements world. Then he took out the small golden pagoda and returned to the Jiuqian 10 Absolutes Tower. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing appeared on the 5th level of the Divine Pagoda and entered the 6th level of the distorted space-time through the Daoyuo Divine Formation. The distorted space-time was empty, and there was no one. Ji Tianqing placed his daughter Wu Shuang, disciple by Long, Qianyu, and Black Dragon in the distorted space-time. The 2 divine beasts, Bai Long and Wu Shuang, were all unconscious, and it would take a long time for them to recover. However, Ji Tianqing released a life-saving divine light to treat their injuries one by one, so that they could wake up as soon as possible. After doing this, he began to meditate and cultivate, waiting patiently. He knew that Yin Yao would wake up soon. Jiku would also be reborn and return to the distorted space-time. Although he still didn't know where Jiku was reborn, he had a strong feeling that it was definitely related to the Jiuqian 10 Absolutes Tower, and it might even be inside the Divine Pagoda. Chapter 2759. Ji Tianqing's judgment was very accurate. He had cultivated in the distorted space-time for more than 4 years, so it had only been about 50 months. His Divine Tao foundation was very stable, and his skills had also improved. At this moment, Jiku returned. 50 months had passed in the Divine Pagoda, but only 1 month had passed in the outside world. Including the 2 months she had been unconscious, she had been asleep for a total of 3 months. Not only had she returned unscathed, but she had also been reborn, becoming even more mysterious and unfathomable. She had a head of fiery red hair that reached her waist, a body of dark golden divine armor, and a dark golden trident. She was like a goddess of war that had descended from the 9 heavens. That beautiful face and unparalleled divine aura was like a divine phoenix. Without a doubt, she, who had been reborn, had truly inherited the phoenix's legacy. In her previous life, she had only reached the strength of a top divine lord and had not advanced any further. She could not break through to the divine king realm, even if she spent her entire life. After all, this had nothing to do with one's cultivation effort but talent. If one's talent and perception were not enough, Even if they cultivated for 100,000 or 1,000,000 years, they would not reach the divine king realm. But it was different now. She, who had been reborn, had the true blood of the phoenix flowing in her body and had mastered the divine bird's legacy. She already had the absolute qualifications to reach the divine king realm. When Ji Tianxing saw her, his eyes could not help but light up. The worry that had been hidden in his heart for a long time also dissipated. That's great. Cuckoo, you've really been resurrected. Jiku was also stunned. She stared at Ji Tianxing, and her eyes immediately turned red and filled with tears. Big brother Tianxing, you're really fine. I already knew that you were invincible. How could anything happen to you? Jiku suppressed her grief and suppressed the tears in her eyes. Like a tired bird returning to its nest, she threw herself into Ji Tianxing's embrace. The two hugged each other tightly, and their emotions were quite emotional. After a while, Jiku calmed down and hurriedly asked, "Oh right, where's eldest senior sister? And Wu Hen, Wu Shuangbailong, are they still alive?" Ji Tianxing gently patted her back and said in a low voice, "They were all killed by the divine king's clone, but Yao Yao is in the process of reviving. Moreover, it was a blessing in disguise for her. After fusing with the sixth divine orb, her power would soar to the limit. Wu Shuang, Bailong, Qin Yu, and Hei Long were all revived by me using the heaven-mending orb. They are currently sleeping and recuperating. However, Lon Kuan self-destructed and Azurite died the earliest. I couldn't revive them." After hearing this, Jiku heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. However, she couldn't save Lon Kuan and Lu Li, which made her heart heavy and full of regret. "Big brother Tianxing, it's my fault. I killed them. Back then, you told us to stay in the five-element world. We should have listened to your orders and not gone to attack the heavenly star." Jiku's heart was filled with regret as she spoke with incomparable self-blame. She could no longer hold back the tears in her eyes. She wanted to tell Ji Tianxing everything that had happened. However, Ji Tianxing had used the time reversal divine ability and already knew what had happened. He gently shook his head and interrupted Jiku. He said in a heavy voice, "Cuckoo, you can't be blamed for this. You can't blame Yao Yao, Bailong, and the others either. You were worried about my safety and went to help the heavenly star. I only regret that I couldn't hold back the divine king's clone and let him go find you. We didn't do anything wrong. The one at fault is the heavenly star and the divine king behind the heavenly star." Ji Tianxing raised his head and stared at the dark space. His eyes flashed with crazed, killing intent. "Soon, we will head to the divine world. I will definitely find out who the divine king behind the heavenly star is. When that time comes, I will make him pay 100 times, 1,000 times the price. Even if I kill the entire divine world and kill millions of people, I will not show mercy." Jika couldn't speak as she sobbed. She could only nod furiously. This was because she was even angrier than Ji Tianxing. She blamed herself even more and wanted to kill that divine king even more. After a long time, Ji Tianxing finally let go of Jiku. He held her face with both hands and said in a serious tone, "Cuckoo, you stay here and recover your divine Dao foundation. Also, take care of Wu Shuang, Bailong, and the others. I need to leave for a while to do something." Jiku immediately understood what he meant. "Is it the heavenly star?" "Yes." Ji Tianxing nodded. Jiku hesitated for a moment and then asked, "After the successive disasters, the heavenly star's leaders and experts have all died. Now that the heavenly star is in chaos, there are only about 10 billion people left. I don't think they will be much of a threat." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said expressionlessly, "I understand what you mean, but I still have to go. The heavenly star and we cannot live under the same sky. They must pay the price. After I destroy the heavenly star, that divine king will lose his claws in the mortal world and will not be able to continue his conspiracy. Also, this is only the first step of our revenge." Ji could not try to dissuade him anymore and nodded in agreement. Ji Tianxing did not waste any time and immediately turned to leave. After leaving the Five Elements world, Ji Tianxing sped through the void and rushed to the heavenly star. 3 months ago, his black hole plan was about to be completed and the heavenly star was about to be destroyed. At the most crucial moment, the Divine King's clone descended into the mortal world and stopped everything. This time, no one could save the heavenly star. 10 days later, Ji Tianxing appeared on the heavenly star. If the Divine Emperor Palace still existed, even if only ruins and fences were left, he would also enter the Divine Emperor Palace and search for clues about the Divine King of the Upper Realm. But now, the Divine Emperor Palace was completely destroyed. Not even a speck of dust was left. He did not need to waste any more time. Whoosh! Ji Tianxing landed on a continent on the heavenly star and used the power of the world to enter the core of the world deep in the Earth's core. With a flash of light, he arrived at the purple light ball with a radius of 70,000 miles. The condensed purple light formed a huge barrier and blocked the endless crimson lava. In the middle of the light ball, there was a sacred purple mountain that was 10,000 feet tall. Hundreds of millions of colorful veins extended from its feet. This was Ji Tianxing's second time entering this place. He was not unfamiliar with it at all. Without any hesitation, he flew directly to the sacred purple mountain and manipulated the power of the world. After a while, the violent power of the world gushed out from the heavenly star. If one was in the void, they would be able to see that the southern hemisphere of the heavenly star spewed out another 100,000 purple flames. Each purple flame was hundreds of thousands of miles tall and erupted with the most terrifying power. A total of 100,000 purple flame-light pillars burst forth with unparalleled power and pushed the heavenly star to begin flying. Although the flying speed was very slow at first, after the heavenly star flew out for 20 million miles, its speed gradually increased. After a short 2 hours, the heavenly star's speed increased and flew out for 40 million miles. At this time, the heavenly star had already entered the gravitational circle of the black hole. With the attack of the terrifying gravitational force, the heavenly star's speed suddenly increased by several times. At the same time, the heavenly star trembled violently. Terrifying earthquakes erupted on the 2 remaining continents, and monstrous waves were also stirred up in the 3 seas. The real calamity had come. Chapter 2760. Swish! Ji Tianxing left planet Heaven Punisher and flew into the sky. He retreated 1,000,000 miles before stopping. Then he stood quietly in the sky and admired the destruction of planet Heaven Punisher. He knew that planet Heaven Punisher and the billions of members of the Heaven Punisher were in chaos and war. The true gods of the Heaven Punisher had all died, and the remaining billions of people couldn't do anything. However, he couldn't let the Heaven Punisher live. He had to get rid of them. Who could guarantee that the Heaven Punisher wouldn't rise again in 100 or 1,000 years and sweep across the planet zones? Besides, he and his family had all been killed by the Divine King's clone. The Heaven Punisher had to bear the brunt of such a blood feud and pay the heaviest price. As planet Heaven Punisher kept accelerating, more and more areas entered the gravitational sphere. One day later, half of planet Heaven Punisher had entered the gravitational sphere. Then, an earth-shattering sound came from planet Heaven Punisher. Rumble! Ji Tianxing saw that half of planet Heaven Punisher was torn apart by the gravitational force, and countless pieces splashed out. Those pieces seemed small, but they were actually thousands of miles of land and mountains. Not only that, endless seawater and lava flew out of planet Heaven Punisher and poured into the gravitational sphere. All the pieces, seawater, and lava were swallowed by the giant black hole. The mysterious black hole was the most terrifying thing in the world. Nobody knew what was hidden inside. Time passed. Planet Heaven Punisher kept collapsing and disintegrating at an extremely fast speed. In less than 2 days, the entire planet Heaven Punisher had disintegrated into billions of pieces and was swallowed by the black hole. A planet that carried countless lives and witnessed the glory of generations of civilizations was destroyed just like that. It was completely swallowed by the black hole. Not even a piece of it was left. A few more hours passed. The sky became calm again. There was no wind or sound at all, as if nothing had happened. Ji Tianxing's anger and murderous intent only subsided a little after he destroyed Planet Heaven Punisher. He didn't stay any longer. He turned around and returned to the Five Elements world. Along the way, he recalled the scene in his dream and couldn't help but murmur, whether it's 100,000 years or 1,000,000 years, there are only 3,000 worlds in the void. No more, no less. Now that I have destroyed Planet Heaven Trader, one of the 3,000 worlds is missing. Somewhere in the void, there should be a star that receives the protection of the heavenly axiom and produces life, evolving into a new world, right? When he thought about it this way, he became even more interested and curious about the illusory and supreme heavenly Tao. 10 days later, Ji Tianxing returned to the Five Elements world. He searched in the void, wanting to see the sleeping Yun Yao. But the golden light disappeared, and Yun Yao was nowhere to be found. He was overjoyed and thought to himself, could it be that Yao Yao has awakened and returned to the divine pagoda? Hence, he quickly returned to the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower and entered the distorted space-time. He didn't see Yun Yao, so he quickly went to find Ji Ku to ask about the situation. When the two of them met, Ji Ku greeted him and said eagerly, "Big brother Tianxing, big senior sister has been sleeping in the void. I was afraid that it was not safe, so I brought her back to the divine pagoda." Ji Tianxing came to a sudden realization and asked, "Then has she awakened?" Ji Ku shook his head and said, "Not yet. She's still sleeping, but her strength is increasing very quickly." "That's good." Ji Tianxing was relieved. "I'll go and see her." Under Ji Ku's lead, he flew to the depths of the distorted space-time and saw the cocoon-like golden light ball. Yun Yao, who was as beautiful as a fairy, was still sleeping in the light ball. Her divine power and divine soul aura were very stable and very powerful. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that her strength had already surpassed the half-step celestial god realm, and it was still increasing. Now, she was about 40 times stronger than a peak true god. When she was 99 times stronger than a peak true god, she would reach the limit of the mortal realm and awaken. Ji Tianxing then asked Ji Ku, "How are Wu Shuang, Bai Long, Qian Yu, and Hei Long?" Ji Ku answered honestly, "They are still sleeping. Their injuries and strength are recovering. They will probably recover in a few more decades." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "Then we'll wait for them to awaken before we plan to ascend. Before that, I still have many things to do." Ji Ku thought for a moment and asked, "Are we going to Planet Chaotic Heaven to kill the remnants of the heaven-punishing race?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "This is just a side trip. I still have to refine some stars and increase my strength to the limit." Ji Ku said eagerly, "I'll go with you." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and nodded, "Stay in the divine tower for now. I'll call for you when we need to fight." "Okay." Ji Ku agreed without hesitation. She had been suppressing her hatred and killing intent. She wanted to find the remnants of the heaven-punishing race and kill them to vent her anger. One day later, Ji Tianxing controlled the power of the world and pushed the Five Elements world to fly toward Planet Chaotic Heaven. 1 month later, the Five Elements world arrived near Planet Chaotic Heaven and stopped in the void. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku went to Planet Chaotic Heaven to kill the remnants of the heaven-punishing race. His Tianxing battleship had been given to Bai Long to pilot. Tianxing battleship had been destroyed during the battle with the Divine King's clone. Now, Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku could only rely on themselves to travel through the void. It was really inconvenient. Fortunately, the Earth Spirit race in the Sword World had started to build a new battleship under the leadership of the Golden Mountain King. With his previous experience, the Golden Mountain King would definitely build an even more powerful divine battleship. 3 days later, Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku arrived at Planet Chaotic Heaven. This planet, which used to be the main planet, was now in chaos and looked rather desolate. The 200,000 heaven-punishing soldiers and 1,000,000 heaven-punishing craftsmen were determined to build this planet into a new home. More than 10 billion foreign race martial artists and civilians had fallen into the hands of the heaven-punishing race, and become their slaves. However, when planet Chaotic Heaven encountered a calamity, more than 100,000 heaven-punishing soldiers fled here. They brought news that planet Chaotic Heaven was facing a calamity and was about to be destroyed. This caused planet Chaotic Heaven, which was originally stable, to fall into chaos. The foreign race experts who were enslaved by the heaven-punishing race all fought back violently, and the situation became more and more intense. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku entered planet Chaotic Heaven and did not waste any time. They immediately started a massacre. Wherever the heaven-punishing race had the most people, they destroyed that place. It did not matter if you were a heaven-punishing soldier, a heaven-punishing craftsman, or a heaven-punishing puppet. As long as you worked for the heaven-punishing race, you would definitely die. The massacre lasted for half a month. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku were invincible. They killed until the sky darkened. Heads rolled and blood flowed. Half a month later, the two of them killed more than 800,000 heaven-punishing race members before leaving planet Chaotic Heaven. The rest were all defeated soldiers scattered all over the world. They were all small factions. The two of them did not have the time to kill them one by one. The foreign race experts would naturally do it for them. It was only a matter of time. Chapter 2761. After leaving the celestial globe, Ji Tianxing did not go to other worlds to slaughter the remnants of the Heaven Punishers. Although there were tens of millions of Heaven Punishers scattered in the thousands of worlds of the various star fields. But if the Heaven Punishers were destroyed, those Heaven Punishers would be like rootless duckweeds. In less than a few decades, they would be killed by the powerhouses of the various worlds. Ji Tianxing controlled the Five Elements world and headed directly to the nearest galaxy. He only had one goal: choose the most suitable star and continue to refine, and refine again. 3 months later, the Five Elements world arrived near a galaxy. This galaxy was the only and most dazzling star core in the celestial globe. The star core that was hundreds of billions of miles long hung in the void, blooming with a brilliant light that would never be extinguished. Among them, there were tens of thousands of stars of various sizes. Basically, they were all barren stars without life. Of course, barren did not mean barren and useless. There were a few planets that seemed to be barren, but they actually contained enormous mineral resources. For example, divine stone veins, metal veins. There were also heaven and earth divine flames, as well as all kinds of wind, fire, and thunder power. Thus, Ji Tianxing chose among the stars. 2 months later, he successfully refined a metal star with a diameter of 30 million miles. 4 months later, he refined a second star with rich resources, which had a diameter of more than 40 million miles. Half a year later, he refined a third star. As time passed, Ji Tianxing continued to refine one star after another. The Five Elements world was still expanding. Its diameter slowly increased from 900 million miles to a diameter of 1 billion miles. Moreover, the Five Elements world had obtained a huge amount of resources, and its strength was rapidly increasing. As a result, Ji Tianxing's strength also rose along with it. Starting from the peak true immortal realm, it was doubled, tripled, quadrupled. 2 years later, in the Five Elements world, in the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower, Yin Yao was the first to wake up. The golden divine light that enveloped her had been completely absorbed by her. The truth was just as Ji Tianxing had expected. The divine light barrier that protected the Five Elements world was formed by the 6th divine pearl. When Yin Yao learned of this in her deep sleep, she was also very shocked and in disbelief. This time, after experiencing death and rebirth, she had also undergone a complete transformation. Even though his appearance hadn't changed, his aura had become even more sacred, as if he was a peerless divine king from the 9 heavens. Her strength had also reached the pinnacle of the mortal world, 99 times that of a peak true god. Furthermore, after fusing with the 6th divine orb, she obtained a brand new power. Light divine power. That's right, the 6th divine pearl represented light. As a result, Yin Yao grasped 6 special divine powers and condensed 6 types of laws. The laws of blue sea, the laws of stars, the laws of longevity, the laws of earth, the laws of wind and fire, and the laws of light. Once she ascended to the divine world, she would be able to break through to the fifth level of the heavenly God realm. Moreover, she could even condense a powerful divine core with the 6 types of laws as the foundation. In addition, Yin Yao had already obtained 6 of Goddess Yao Wang's 7 spirits. In the dream, not only had she experienced millions of years, she had seen life, death, and reincarnation. She had also obtained most of Goddess Yao Wang's memories. This was the main reason for the change in her temperament. Without a doubt, the current her was very similar to Goddess Yao Wang from the ancient era. The two's appearance and temperament were 80% similar. Whether in the mortal world or the divine world, she was a top-notch goddess who could make billions of gods infatuated. When Yin Yao woke up, her first reaction wasn't joy or excitement. Instead, she was in extreme pain and tears flowed down her face. The first people she thought of were Ji Tianxing, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang. Then it was Ji Ku Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts. In her memories, everyone had met with misfortune and been killed by the divine king's clone. Even if she survived and benefited from the disaster, it was still extremely painful and disheartening. Fortunately, Jiku had been by her side the whole time. The moment she woke up, Jiku held her hand and gently comforted her. After Yin Yao calmed down, Jiku explained what had happened to her. Hearing that everyone had been resurrected, Yin Yao felt slightly better. However, the glazed fire dragon and Lan Kun were dead, and Ji Wuhan was also taken away by the Almighty of the Dragon Realm. She was still filled with grief and worry. Ji Ku comforted her again. Brother Tianxing has already done his best, but Glazed and Lan Kun really can't be saved. This is fate. Perhaps one day in the future, we will surpass reincarnation and surpass the heavenly Tao, and we might be able to bring Glazed and Lan Kun back. As for Wuhan, he was saved by the Almighty of the Dragon Realm. It's better than falling into the hands of that divine king. After Ji Ku's persuasion, Yin Yao felt much better and her emotions slowly calmed down. Then she asked Ji Ku to take her to visit Ji Wushuang, Bai Long, and the others. For a full 15 years, the 5 elements world had been swimming freely in the galaxy. Planets full of resources were swallowed by the 5 elements world one after another. It wasn't until the 16th year that the 5 elements world finally stopped expanding. Although the diameter of this planet still didn't exceed 1 billion kilometers, it had reached 990 million kilometers. And Ji Tianxing's strength had also reached 99 times that of a peak true god. He had already reached the limit of the mortal world. The two numbers were inexplicably similar. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Then, the 5 elements world stopped in the galaxy. Ji Tianxing returned to his peak strength and returned to the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda. At this time, more than 700 years had passed in the distorted space-time. Ji Ku and Yun Yao waited patiently. They had been consolidating their divine Tao foundation and cultivating various divine abilities and consummate skills. In more than 700 years, the two of them had cultivated dozens of divine abilities. Ji Wushuang, Bai Long, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon had already recovered more than 600 years ago. They had been cultivating in seclusion for over 600 years and only ended their seclusion when Ji Tianxing returned. After such a long period of seclusion, they naturally gained a lot. The two of them and the 2 divine beasts had all reached half-step celestial god realm and mastered dozens of divine abilities and secret skills. Everything was ready to go. After Ji Tianxing reunited with everyone, he prepared the ascension plan. However, there were still a few problems to solve before ascension. If everyone ascended, what about the 5 elements world? Continue to stay in the mortal world? Of course, Ji Tianxing wasn't willing. He had already merged with the 5 elements world. With the 5 elements world, he was immortal. He also had endless source stones and could use the power of the world. He really wanted to take the 5 elements world away. However, it was obviously unrealistic to take a planet with him. Since ancient times, such a ridiculous thing had never happened in tens of thousands of years of history. The second problem, Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, and White Dragon naturally had to ascend to the divine world. However, Black Dragon would definitely ascend to the Dragon Realm. Qianyu might also enter the Dragon Realm. In this case, everyone would be separated once they ascended. Moreover, they wouldn't be able to reunite for the next few hundred years or even thousands of years.